Start with some chanting, and then we'll discuss tonight's topic. Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharma swarupine Avatara Varishtaya Ramakrishnaya Te Namaha Om Yathagner Dahika Shakti Ramakrishne Sthitha Hiya Sarva Vidya Swarupam Tam Saradam Pranamamyaham Om Bharatatve Sadalino Ramakrishna Samagyaya Yo Dharma Sthapana Rato Vire Shanktam Namamyaham. Om, salutations to that Ramakrishna, the avatar par excellence, who is the establisher of Dharma. Salutations to Sarada Devi, who is inseparable from Sri Ramakrishna as heat is inseparable from a fire. She is the embodiment of all the Mahavidyas, Kali, Tara, Shodashi, Bhuvaneshwari, Bhairavi, Chidamastaka, Dhumavati, Bagala, Matangi, Kamala, and others. Salutations to that Sarada Devi, the embodiment of all the gods and goddesses. Salutations to Vivekananda, the great hero who establishes the Dharma by his master's command. He is ever absorbed in the non-dual plane. Salutations to that great Vivekananda. Om Khalindi Phulla Kamale Madhavena Kridarata Brahmananda Namastubhyam Sadguru Loka Nayaka. Sadguru Loka Nayaka. Salutations to Swami Brahmananda, our Parampara Guru. Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Reva Param Brahma, Tasme Shri Gurave Namaha. I salute my Guru, who is none other than pure non-dual consciousness, who is verily Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Salutations to that indweller, that Guru. May this be an offering at his lotus feet. Om Shanti 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 Shri Guru Arpanamastu. Jaima. It's very exciting now to speak to you from Atlanta. We're just at the end of our retreat. It's a beautiful and wonderful few days. I'll tell you a little bit about it, and I wish you all could have been here, but I'm only reminded how important it is for all of us to be in the room together and to be able to do this in this way. And so I hope that in the days to come, we'll be able to have many more in-person gatherings. So here I am in Atlanta, and actually this room is very special. I'm speaking to you now from the Swami's guest room in the Atlanta Center. And so many, many great monastics have stayed in this room, and you can really feel it. There's a picture of Swami Pavitranandaji here behind me. Some of you might not be familiar with Swami Pavitranandaji, but if you've studied the work of Swami Sarvapriyanandaji, and if you've been to the Vedanta Society of New York, you would have undoubtedly felt the power of Swami Pavitranandaji. And through him, you would have felt undoubtedly the power of Swami Brahmananda, who is, of course, the spiritual son of Sri Ramakrishna, whose power is Sri Ramakrishna himself. Now, the important thing is that Swami Pavitrananda was a disciple of Swami Brahmananda. And he didn't found, but Swami Vivekananda found the Vedanta Society of New York, but he was one of the ministers at the Vedanta Society of New York. And Swami Pavitranandaji, who is another disciple of Swami Brahmananda, Swami Prabhavanandaji, another disciple of Swami Brahmananda, founded the Hollywood Center, the Vedanta Society of Southern California. So on the West Coast, Swami Prabhavananda, Swami Brahmananda's disciple, and on the East Coast, Swami Pavitrananda, Swami Brahmananda's disciple. And that's important for us in our lineage because our guru's guru is Swami Brahmananda. So the grace of Swami Brahmananda is clearly flowing, which is none other than the grace of Sri Ramakrishna. And so it's quite special for me today to be sitting here and being able to address you in this room by the picture of Swami Pavitranandaji in this very holy place. The vibration in this room is beautiful. It's like so refined, so pure, so sattvic. And so this is how it is inside the temple also. In the Vedanta Society of Atlanta, they have a beautiful shrine room. And partly that's because their community is such a heart-filled community. They're bhaktas, powerful bhaktas. So every day, that room is resounding with spiritual music. Bhaktas, just out of sheer sincerity and love, playing Kandana Bhava Bandhana, playing Om Hrim Ritam, playing Sarva Mangala Mangalye, just the Arati songs. And then Bala Krishnanji coming in every day to do the Arati and to do a daily puja. And in the morning, Jyoti Ma and Sadhika Ma are working so hard to do an early morning puja at 6 a.m. Every single day, Thakur gets a puja, and they sit there and they meditate. And just the whole place is filled with so much warmth and so much sunlight and so much sattva that it really makes you appreciate tan matras. So tan matra means vibration. And vibration is not physical in that it cannot be measured objectively. At least people have tried, but there's nothing quite convincing about that. Nothing so foolproof about studying it objectively. Rather, it's subjectively experienced. It's good to see you today, Kristen. Sharma. So that is to say that we feel tanmatras in a subjective and intimate and personal way. It's not a fact of physical experience, but it is a fact of subtle experience. It's an experience in the mind. So when we go near someone, we feel a sort of energy, a presence, and then in some sense we are attracted to that, in some sense we're repelled by that. And it's all beyond the level of the mind's understanding. It's non-verbal, it's intuitive, and animals like cats and birds and dogs have a good sense for this. So they just pick up on these vibrations, if you will. That's what we would call in this tradition tanmatras. Tanmatra can mean like the subtle faculty of smelling, tasting, seeing, touching, hearing. It's usually translated as that. But it has also the connotation of subtle matter, like subtle earth, subtle water, subtle fire, subtle air, subtle space. And that has the connotation of vibration. So it's called tanmatra, and that's why temples are so important, because in the temple, the tanmatra is cultivated over a period of time. And then in certain places in nature, like for instance in Ojai, there's a place that's sacred to the Chumash, and in that place the rituals are performed. There's something very specifically powerful about that place, and so they've cultivated over thousands of years, not thousands of years, but the previous tribes that were there also revered that space, and even now the people who are in Ojai, the settlers, in the modern period, they also revere that place. So whoever is there, chances are there was probably somebody there before them, and chances are there was also somebody there before them, and chances are they all kind of shared the sacred space. That's another thing. When you see Christianity in Mexico, it's very interesting. The place where the vision of the Divine Lady of Guadalupe was had was at one point of time a Tonantzin temple. So you can see these sites are very important, and the energy that's cultivated in a place like this is for eternity, for centuries. And it's being cultivated by people every single day just out of sincerity and love. So this is one such place. It's a very powerful shrine in which the vibration is very high. So just something about tanmatras. It's very important that we pay attention to these things, because sitting in a place with good tanmatras will be very important for our meditation. If we sit in a place where the tanmatras are not conducive to meditation, unless we ourselves are really adept at meditation, we'll struggle to enter into a meditative state. We'll feel scattered, we won't be able to focus, and we won't get that spiritual joy. But if we enter into a place with very powerful tanmatras, and the only reason why any place would have those tanmatras in the first place is because bhaktas gather there, then in such a place where many bhaktas have cried tears of love, where many meditators have reached deep states of absorption, where many jnanis have had insights and realizations, and where many karma yogis have done great service, in that place you find the mind becomes indrawn very easily, and God's presence is felt most tangibly. So it's helpful to seek out holy places to practice. It's helpful to seek out holy people to practice. So in spiritual life, the company of devotees and the company of the holy cannot be understated. It's very, very powerful just to be together with somebody. Just to talk to them over the phone or on Zoom or something can have such a profound and meaningful effect on sadhana. But how much more then is the case when you can actually be with them? So this past few days, past week or so, we've had the wonderful fortune to be in a very sattvic place, a very powerful spiritual center. And you can feel that tanmatras are really conducive to all manner of spiritual activity. And we've been surrounded by very, very ardent and sincere bhaktas and very refined spiritual practitioners. So at sadhu sangha, really there's something to be said for it. And when we feel it, that's only when we're convinced that religious life is real. So that's why I'm so grateful for each and every one of you. Those who came in person, thank you so much for coming. Those who tuned in online, thank you so much. But more importantly, that we're all here now. That on Monday night, we get together, some 50 or 70 of us, and we just talk about God for like 2, 3, 4 hours sometimes. And that's just what we do. Week after week, year after year, it's just what we do and it's what we've been doing. And so for 5 years, we've not missed a single Monday night satsang. And like, that's so important to me, and that you're all here and that we can do this together. Thank you. Just so happy, so touched. It was a very teary goodbye. So, see, Asha was good. She ripped the bandage off. Just yesterday, she was like, I gotta go home. Sorry, bye. Today, it was like a long, drawn out, oh my God. Yeah, she was like, Audi 5,000. Irish goodbye. Yeah, it was rough. It was rough. It was like, damn. But it's filled me with so much gratitude and so much appreciation for our community and what it means to have one, what it means to come together and genuinely, in a space of real unconditional love, be able to share this thing about God. But one more point I want to make. So you get tanmatras in places like holy shrines. You get tanmatras around certain people who are very holy. And it doesn't mean they need to belong to a certain tradition or even have some concept of God. Like people carry with them these spiritually nourishing tanmatras regardless of their belief. In fact, sometimes the belief in the form is not only secondary, but sometimes it can interrupt that free flow of unconditional love because it burdens that love with a sense of propriety. So there are many people in this world who don't profess any religion whatsoever, who don't at all use the word God, but for whom spirituality is a living presence, it's a living reality, and coming into the presence of such a person, you will be spiritually benefited. You'll feel the tanmatra. So like that, tanmatras can be important in the terms of like the places that we go to and the company that we keep, obviously the food that we eat, but importantly, most importantly, the ideas that we entertain. So sadhu sangha is not just being with people in real life. More importantly, sadhu sangha is association with holy ideas. So being with holy people, being in holy places, these are all spiritually nourishing things. But when we don't have access to like an in-person community, and many of us might not even have access to an online community also. We might not have people around us who can understand spiritual life and support us in the way that we need. And so often we feel a bit of despair. We're like, oh my God, I'm all by myself. What do I do? I'm in this corner of the world. Everyone else seems to be over there. I feel like I'm without community. And your spiritual life might at times feel a bit dry. You might feel like, look, I'm doing the puja, I'm meditating, I'm doing my best, but it feels dry. And I'm not getting that spiritual joy that I used to get or that I crave. And then there are times when we, go to a retreat maybe, and then we go to a holy place, or we hang out with holy people, and wherever two or more are gathered in my name, there I am also. The Christ promise, if you get together and raise a holy vibration, you'll feel something. And so we might feel something. And then when we part ways, then we might feel like, oh my God, I've lost that. I've lost the holy place, and I've lost all those holy people, and now it feels like I've lost a great thing, this thing that was charging and energizing my sadhana. So usually after a retreat like this, for a few weeks, sometimes just for a few days, sometimes just for a few hours, but often for a week or two or three, you'll feel a kind of spiritual high. Usually, you'll get a boost from it by going to a holy place that's called pilgrimage, and by being with holy people that's called sadhu sangha. You get a boost. Undoubtedly, you get a boost. But then we might feel like it fades away or wears off a little bit. So I just want to say something about integration and about follow-up. So whenever you get a spiritual boost through any means, like through sadhu sangha or holy company, or through some kind of miraculous shaktipat, like whatever the case may be, whenever you get a spiritual boost, it's important to stabilize that spiritual boost by keeping your mind in spiritual thought. So that is to say, sometimes the pendulum can swing very dramatically, especially when the energy goes up a lot. It sometimes comes down with sudden force. So to keep it up, as it were, which is the effort of daily sadhana, it's as simple as keeping the mind in spiritual thought. And that's as simple as keeping books around and keeping lectures around and keeping audio and media around that remind you of God. It's as simple as that. So Swami Vivekananda once defined sadhu sangha as association with ideas, with holy ideas. So anytime you can just go to the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and there you are with M and Rakal and Narendranath and all those other wonderful people with the Holy Mother sitting there with Ramakrishna enjoying all this ecstasy. Now he's sitting absorbed in meditation. Now he's singing and laughing and dancing. Now he's cracking lewd jokes. In another place he's profoundly explaining some obtuse point of philosophy in a way that's simple and direct and understandable. Just like that, anytime we feel lonely, we can always go to the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. We can always go to the complete works of Swami Vivekananda. We can go to any spiritual literature, the complete works of Holy Mother. Wherever we go, whatever tradition, we'll find solace in the teachings of the masters, especially in books about people's lives. So if we ever feel any spiritual dryness, the first thing to do is to go and read the life of some great spiritual being, like Julian of Norwich, or Teresa of Avila, or St. John of the Cross, or Milarepa, or something like that. You can read the lives of Sri Ramakrishna and Vivekananda and Holy Mother and the direct disciples, and I guarantee you that just studying a biography like this will fill you with tears, will fill your heart with profound love and appreciation. Studying philosophy is good, but studying lives is even better. Life gives unto life. Spirituality is caught, not taught, as Swami Prabhavanandaji told us. So, importantly, when you don't have access to Sangha in person or online, when you don't have access to a holy place, never forget that you will always, thanks to the internet, and thanks to like the prevalence of printing and press, thanks to all of those elements of grace, now we get to access holy ideas on the go, wherever we are. So we should always keep it in our back pocket. We should always have something that can bring the mind to God whenever it starts to stray away. And all we have to do is keep it there. Whenever the mind sinks away from holy thought, bring it back to that plane, literally, by keeping your mind in the gospel or something like that. Yeah, Asha is saying, I cried on the plane today reading the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Rest in peace. Right? So the power of that, just Especially when everyone is open after something like this, like after the inspiration comes, we're that much more susceptible to the transmission that can occur just through simply reading Swami Vivekananda or Sri Ramakrishna. And the thing about Swami Vivekananda is just 12 pages at a time will do. 3 pages will do, 1 page will do, one passage will do. So too with the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Just take like one scene and then meditate on that scene. You can read 2 or 3 paragraphs, and it's like there you are in the midst of all that activity with all of those people entertaining all of those ideas. That too is sadhu sangha. So we can like travel to a place with our mind, if you will. And last night around the fire, we were all of us discussing spiritual experiences and the relative value that they have in spiritual life. And we all agreed that like a spiritual experience is defined by the fact that it stays with you. Experiences come and go, but a spiritual experience, it's special because when it comes, it doesn't really go away. Even if the intensity might fade over time, it will always be there for you. And many were saying yesterday that when they think about it, when they return in their mind to the puja, even as a memory, tears come up. In the midst of the puja, they were feeling an overflowing surge of emotion, but then even to think about it later, that emotion wells up yet again. The very memory of that experience can bring with it a kind of repeat experience. And one gentleman was also saying that he was looking at a picture, and the picture sort of came to life during the puja, and then now when he comes back into the temple, the picture seems to be awake still. Maybe that could fade, but probably it won't. Once you see something like that, it's always with you. So the thing about spiritual experience, and what makes it different from other experiences, is that it stays with you in a way that other experiences don't. They feel deeper and more meaningful and more formative than most of the other experiences that we have. And sometimes they take us by surprise. They don't have to happen in like a formal spiritual context. It can often happen in a temple, during a puja, with holy people, reading a holy book. It can happen when you're in a spiritual environment, but it can also happen to anyone, anytime, for any reason. While you're mowing your lawn, for instance, or something like that. It can just suddenly take you. That's the nature of Shaktipata, sudden inspiration, samavesha, spontaneous immersion into Shiva nature. It can happen to anyone, anywhere, for any reason. That's why grace is grace. It's not conditioned. It's not predictable. It's absolutely free. So having said that, sometimes when you're watching your house burn down, or when you're like sitting next to your loved one at the hospital, holding their hand as they wait to die, like in these moments, you feel it. Shaktipata. It just happens. And when you feel it, it feels eternal and real and meaningful in a way that few things are. So Holy Mother, Sarada Devi, said it so beautifully. Only time spent in God is eternal. All else is a passing show. Yeah, that's why there are certain people in our life, we can never lose them because they are so holy, and their lives were so holy, and their presence in our life was so holy that they're always with us. That holiness that they were, that they embodied, is now a part of us. So you can never lose them, actually. They're in you as you. And so spiritual experiences can never be lost. Spiritual people, spiritual places, spiritual experiences, they can never be lost because you can revisit them in your mind and you'll get the same hit, if not an even deeper hit. Because as the years go by, you start to integrate and take that experience into your being in a deeper, more meaningful way. So these experiences, not only do they stay with you, but they also tend to continue giving in a way that most things in the world cannot. They continue nourishing you and transforming you in deeper and subtler ways than ever before as the years go on. So that's the difference between the spiritual experience and just any other experiences. Other experiences may be intense, they may be quite thrilling, and they may be quite dramatic, but they don't necessarily stay and they don't necessarily transform you the way spiritual experiences do. So with that in mind, it's good to go to holy places. It's good to be with holy people, but it's particularly good to keep the mind in holy ideas by constant exposure to things like the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna and whatnot. Only moments in God are eternal. But another thing, fame is fleeting, perfection is forever. I was talking about a tequila ad. That there's like a Patron ad on a building just outside our Hollywood Vedanta temple. So when you step out into the parking lot, the first thing you see is this big bright neon sign, and it's a tequila ad, Patron or something like that. It says, "Fame is fleeting," and it's Hollywood. So this is looking over Sunset Boulevard, over Hollywood Boulevard. So it's a particularly poignant message because Hollywood is all about the pursuit of clout and fame. So it says, "Fame is fleeting," because by God is it. Today you're important, tomorrow you're not. People come today, people go tomorrow. People praise you today, they blame you tomorrow, and vice versa. Fame is incredibly fleeting. And for that, people chase and chase and chase and pant and cry and do all manner of things just for that fleeting bit of fame. It's worth having, though, just to see through. But anyway, the ad says, "Fame is fleeting, perfection is forever." It's a remarkable claim. So in a sense, experiences are fleeting, but character is forever. So It's not about the experience, it's about who you are as a result of the experience. And that is forever. That change in character, that complete reframing of how you see yourself and how you see your world, that is forever. And also, over the past few days here in Atlanta, I've been meeting so many people who haven't come to the Zooms because their schedules don't allow. A lot of the times on the East Coast, as many of you know, it's just too late. Like 10 p.m. might be too late, especially on a Monday night when people have work early in the morning. And of course, to prioritize that means maybe you can't come live. So I've been used to like looking at, 50 of you on a Zoom screen every Monday and like really getting to know you over the Zoom screen. Many of you I know quite intimately in that we've had many conversations together, we've been in person together. Like I see you on the screen. And as you know, I'm always like looking and clicking through the screen so I can see your faces and actually like talk to you and not talk at you. Because it's always, as at every single moment from 2020 onwards, it's always felt like a conversation to me. Not like a lecture, but like an actual conversation. It's felt personal and meaningfully intimate. But I also realized something else. There are a lot of people who cannot make it live to the Zooms for various reasons. A lot of the times it's just a schedule thing. Um, and sometimes also it's like a shyness thing. Sometimes also like they're just kind of shy to be in a live environment. And so I've been hearing these wonderful stories of so many people have come out to Atlanta. And I just kind of assumed that most of them were part of the Vedanta Society, like the Atlanta community. But I realized like a vast majority of them had come because they had seen on the Instagram post that we were going to be here and they were excited. They just wanted to like come in person. And so many of them took a very bold step. They were shy to come on Zoom, but they just something moved them to come in person. And I didn't even know that. And just recently I was talking to some people and they were telling me how for 5 years they've been listening to the podcast and hearing all of your voices. And you mean a lot to them. They're like, oh, when this person said that thing, or when that person said this thing. And they feel like they're getting sadhu sangha from all of you just by hearing your voices and your earnest questions. And they've been with us for so long. And it's like just so touching and moving to meet them in real life. And so we're trying our best to be as much of a community as we can. But it's like there's just so many people, who are not here, who are here. And I just wanted to like mention that if you're not in the Zoom room and I'm not like looking at you and I don't say your name and I wish I could, like I'm starting to feel that you're there anyway. And it means a lot to me. And I'm so happy that we get to be here together. So we're always here for you. And that's the exciting thing. They mentioned that too. They like, I feel like when I'm lonely, I can just turn on the Zoom or I can just listen to a podcast and you're all here for them. And that's so meaningful to me, that we get to do that. So anyway, I'm just really touched by our online community and more am I inspired to like get in-person gatherings together. So next up, hopefully we'll go to Colorado. Kuleshwari is like holding down a really powerful frequency center there. Like she's holding down the frequency in her house. And so hopefully we can visit Kuleshwari and Andrewji and we can have a nice gathering in Colorado. That's maybe next, and then Texas right after that. And then also we're still talking about Mexico, and early June there's going to be New York. So I just want to keep moving and keep meeting people in as many places as possible because nothing like it. Okay, having said all of that, a brief recap of what we've done the past 5 or 6 days, and then let's get into the material for today. So Thursday and Friday night we had 2 conversations about the history of Tantra. So we've been talking about this together also. We've been discussing things like where did Tantra come from, what's its relationship to the Vedas, and we've been learning how Tantra can be considered a pre-Vedic tradition if you look at the Mohenjo-daro Harappa civilization, and if you consider the clay tablets that we find there, evidence of early Tantra, then you could say, oh, even before the Vedas, during the Indus-Saraswati pre-Vedic civilization, we saw all the evidence of tantric worship. There were Shiva lingams and Charanamrita kundas. It seemed like they were worshipping Shiva back then, and Durga, because there are clay tablets of Durga, seemingly a goddess standing near what appears to be a bull, stuff like that. So insofar as in the tantric world we have Mahishasura Mardini, the goddess slaying the buffalo demon, insofar as we have Shiva lingams and ideas of the Shushumna Nadi, a lot of materials from pre-Vedic India actually suggests a kind of tantric set and setting in both theory and practice. A kind of proto-tantra, if you will. Then there are scholars who suggest tantric's non-Vedic roots. So not necessarily just pre-Vedic, but also non-Vedic, insofar as there are Dravidian peoples who maybe have traditions that are different from the Aryan Vedic people, and so those traditions get assimilated into the Vedas, and perhaps vice versa. And that's why Rudra, in the beginning of the Vedic period, is regarded with a bit of suspicion and a bit of tension, but then he's later regarded with a lot of love, reverence, and awe. So the journey of Rudra as a deity in the Vedas could be the journey of 2 peoples working out their differences and trying to reconcile a worldview that accommodates them both. So you feel a kind of tantric Vedic tension sometimes, but even within the Veda you feel that. So it could have been a non-Vedic tradition, it could have been a pre-Vedic tradition that made its way into the Vedas. But I've been arguing this past few weeks, or at least this past few days, on Thursday and Friday especially, that it is a Vedic tradition. That you find in texts like the Yajur Veda all that you need for Tantra. You find the 5 basic mantras for Lord Shiva in the Taittiriya Aranyaka. You find the Sri Rudram, which gives you not only the mantras to Ganesh, but also the main mantra to Lord Shiva, Om Namah Shivaya, and Om Triambakam Yajamahe. But also you find in both the Shukla and Krishna Yajur Veda, like names for Lord Shiva. The Shatnama, Sahasranama idea, it's there even in the Vedas. So the veneration of Lord Shiva in the Yajur Veda is quite important because you can see the tantric foundations are in Veda actually. So we've been talking about the Krishna Yajur Veda and the various names for Shiva that we find there. We've been talking about the Taittiriya Upanishad. Also, a thought came to mind. I might not have shared it with you recently, but the cosmology in the Taittiriya Upanishad is also really important for Tantra. Because in the Taittiriya Upanishad, we learn that in the beginning there's Brahman. If you can think in terms of logical sequence, not temporal sequence, because this is prior to time. So when I say in the beginning, I don't mean like at a certain point in time. I mean prior to all time. So logically speaking, in the beginning, there's Brahman, pure reality. And then it's as if there's a stirring within Brahman, a kind of desire that arises, an itcha, if you will. And from that comes akasha, space. And then this emanation model of like 5 layers of reality. So space is the subtlest, arguably the first and highest layer of reality. Just prior to that is Brahman, or the ultimate consciousness. Then after space comes air. So it's as if in space a movement occurs, and then that movement itself, the dynamism of space itself, is called air, Vayu. Prana, you could argue that Akasha is space, but Vayu is prana. That's why the pranas are called Pancha Vayus, the 5 winds. So Vayu is energy. So what you get is Shiva Shakti. The idea that there's some reality, I like to call her Kali, which is beyond both Shiva and Shakti, but her manifestations are Shiva, Shakti, space and energy, consciousness and prana, if you will. So space, energy, and then interestingly, from that energy comes heat. And from that heat comes moisture. And from that moisture comes earth. The moisture crystallizes, if you will, into earth. So this Prithvi Tattva, the grossest of all the realities, it evolves, it emanates from water, which in turn emanates from fire, which in turn emanates from wind, which in turn emanates from space. And these 5 elements are mapped into the 5 chakras. And just the way these elements are explained as a kind of sequence of evolution and also as a sequence of involution, just that way of explaining things kind of makes it sound like importantly, like a kind of chakra model of Shrishti and Sanghara. It gives us a map. Insofar as it teaches us how reality came to be, it also teaches us how to backtrack, how to retrace our steps, how to reverse engineer it until we can get back to source. So we come into this body, as it were, into this house we're thrown like a dog without a bone. We come into this body, as it were, with the energy descending through the crown of the head, coming into the Muladhara. And then once that energy reaches the Muladhara, we experience this physical plane and we're quite enamored of it. And so we wander about like ghosts, circling samsara again and again and again until we become interested in something deeper. Then the whole journey is to retrace our steps. For the Kundalini Shakti to go from earth in the Muladhara, back into water, back into fire, back into wind, finally into space. So the 5 chakra model, the 5 mantras of the Taittiriya Upanishad, the 5 heads of Lord Shiva, the 5 powers and the 5 actions of Lord Shiva, you can see how they map onto the 5 chakras. And so this early chakra model, it's there in the Taittiriya Upanishad. The mantras for Lord Shiva, the 5 mantras, pancha mantras, like the Sadhyo Jata mantra, Vamadeva mantra, Ishana mantra, like the Aghorebhyo mantra, or Tat Purushaya Vidmahe, those mantras are there in Taittiriya Aranyaka. So the whole point of Thursday evening was to discuss the Vedic roots of the Tantra. And then more importantly, I wanted to discuss. Oh, that was actually Friday evening. We talked about the Vedic roots of Tantra. And then more importantly, I want to discuss how many people during this Vedic period stepped away from like social life and worldly activity, and they retired to a life of asceticism in order to more fully actualize their religious or spiritual yearnings. So many of these people, they became devotional, and their devotion was centered on one Vedic deity, which they felt best represented the ultimate nature of reality. And for the early Shaivas, that deity par excellence was Rudra. Because Rudra destroys, he must therefore also be the creator. And so we looked at this argument from the Shaiva Siddhanta text known as the Raurava Agama, which is a kind of dualistic Tantra. But there it said, that Jagata Karya Darshanat, because we see a complex world, we therefore expect a complex cause. In other words, an intelligent agent who is the source and substance of this world. So we explored this in the lecture called Proof for God a few weeks ago. I thought it was a pretty important lecture because it's important to prove God on dualistic terms first. Because then when we come to Advaita, it's that much more dramatic when we realize that we are God. We are God in every sense of the word, but first we have to define in what sense we're using that word. So if we're God in every sense of the word, let's be very sensible as to in what sense we use the word God. So with that said, we need a lakshanam, a definition of God. But not only that, we need pramana. Not only a definition, but evidence that our definition works and that such a God really does exist before we can even say our identity with her. So we say that there is God. Why must there be God? Of course, in that lecture, we go into it more fully. So I'll just reference the Proof of God lecture. But we need there to be God, logically and philosophically speaking, because unless there was an intelligent agent, you cannot explain this complex effect. And we said, evolutionary biology offers some refutations to this. In evolutionary biology, we learned that it's mutation and variation and natural selection, which is responsible for all this complexity. But then we kind of refuted that argument to the best of our ability by taking up the hard problem of matter, the hard problem of consciousness. We looked at some shortcomings and lacunas in the evolutionary biologist scheme. For instance, the fact that all the basic building blocks don't start out simple. So it's not like you get complexity from simplicity over billions of years through natural selection. I mean, the building blocks themselves are already complex to begin with. So complexity is there from the very beginning in the very smallest of particles. It's infinitely complex. So it couldn't have arisen out of simpleness because there doesn't seem to be any simplicity in even the simplest of things. Complexity, 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 which implies some intelligent creator. So you don't just assume the anthill appeared out of nowhere. The complexity of the anthill itself naturally and spontaneously inclines you to believe that there was some agent, namely the intelligent ant, the highly intelligent ant even. So the intuition that we have, it's an intuitive argument. So it's intuitive because the mind already does this. The intuition that we have regarding complex effects is that there is some complex cause behind it. And what we call a complex cause is an agent, a being, an intelligent being. So this is the intelligent design idea. But we went a bit further. Beyond just saying there must be a God because there must be a Mahakaruna, otherwise you would get an infinite regress. We talked about that argument too. We made a cosmological argument for God, and then we made a logical argument for God. But having said all of that, the more important thing in this verse that we have to consider is what kind of God. So God is the supreme cause, and God is the complex agent, which is to say the intelligent being, who is the cause of the very complex effect called the world. But who is God? And the early Vedics, those who became the first few Shaivas, arguably, they felt like Rudra was the best candidate. Like I was saying in that Proof for God lecture, they felt that Rudra was the ultimate reality because Rudra is the destroyer. And so they reasoned that if something destroys, it must also be the creator, because you cannot kill what you did not create, as Corey Taylor and Slipknot paraphrased. Beautiful idea that if something dissolves, it's from that place. If something dissolves into something else, then it's from that something else that something must have come out in the first place. Because that's what we see in nature. We see potentials and we see actuals. Something is actualized, something is a potential. So like the oak tree is an actualized oak seed, and an oak seed is a potential oak tree. And from that seed comes the tree, and from that tree comes the seed. So all throughout nature, all pervasively, this kind of Unmesha and Nimesha is observed. That is to say, Anuloma, Viloma. That is to say, expansion and contraction. All throughout nature, there is a potential becoming actualized, and there is an actualized thing reverting back to the potential. So it's like a wave rising and falling, rising and falling. That's true of everything in the world. So if this world appears, then it must have emerged out of some source. Vishvadyam Vishvabijam Pankcha Vaktram Trinetram. That Lord Shiva has 5 heads and 3 eyes. And he is the Vishvadyam, the seat of all reality, the ground of being. And he is the Vishvabija, the source from which it springs forth. Nikila Bhayaharang Panchavaktram Trinetram. He's the destroyer of all fear. So that Shiva, he destroys the world, meaning it is him alone into which the world dissolves at the time of dissolution. So if he is the final resting place of the world, then he must also be the starting point of the world. So the argument we got thus far is as follows. Because the world is a complex effect, Jagata Karya Darshana, therefore, Jagata Karya Darshanat, Asti Karta, therefore there must be some agent, there must be some intelligent being who is responsible for this complex effect. And what kind of being is it? Since To destroy requires the ability to create. That being must be the destroyer. Asmat Prabhu Haraha, which means therefore God is Shiva or God is Hara. Now I said let's not take this in a sectarian way, because we're not saying God is Shiva in like that cult of personality way. We're not saying that it's Kali in that way, as if Kali is the best deity. We're saying that whoever you choose, whether it's Krishna or Yahweh or whoever it is, you have to respect that God is also the destroyer. Otherwise, God is not absolute. Otherwise, you have some kind of demon or some kind of devil or something that is as powerful as God, except in the other direction. So for God to be absolute, the devil must be working for God. So even if there is a devil, the devil is functioning through God's own will, if you will. So we talked about that in the Proof for God lecture, but now there's something even more important that we need to do. Having discussed proof for God, we now need to talk about the soul. Like, what's our relation to God? So we learned something about God. We learned Stri Pumna Pumsaka Dvitvaj Jagata Karya Darshana Asti Karta Sa Hit Vaitat Srijyati Asmat Prabhuharaha. Verse 1 of the Shiva Jnana Bodha, which is a section of the Round of Agama, says this. Because the world is incredibly complex, and they give a gender kind of complexity here. Because things are either male or female or neuter, that is to say, some plants are asexual, some plants are both male and female, there's a male part of the plant, the female part of the plant. Because the world is inherently complex, at least in terms of how complex gender is, because of that, astikarta, there must be some agent. And sahit vaitat, srijati, because that creation requires the ability to reabsorb. Asmat Prabhuharaha. Therefore, God is Shiva. Since Shiva is the reabsorber, since he is the destroyer, he must also be the source, the Vishva Bija. This was what we covered in the Proof for God lecture. But then there's more. So this whole thing, you can say, is a Swarupa Lakshana. We are defining God in terms of himself. That is to say, this definition and this logical argument is made with regards to God and God alone. It doesn't yet consider the soul, but it does consider the world. It considers the world, and it reasons from the complexity of the world, the existence of this supreme being. Now, the next verse we're going to get in the Round of Agama does something very interesting. It defines God in terms of the soul and in terms of the world. So we just used the world in passing in the past verse to prove God, but that still was a Swarupa Lakshana, a definition with regards to that entity, without reference to anything the entity does, or without reference to the other things that are in relation with the entity. So God has been defined in her own terms. She is that intelligent agent which explains the complexity of this effect called the world, and she must be the destroyer, since only one who creates can be the destroyer. So therefore, she must be the creator also. She is the monotheistic absolute of this religion. Okay, having said that, the next definition is called Tatastha Lakshana, which means indirect definition. Now we're going to try to understand God in relation to the world, and mostly in relation to the soul. That I think is going to be interesting. Oh, by the way, as an aside, because I'm speaking to you now from this room, one benefit is that the Tanmatras are beautiful. So many great swamis have stayed here, so you can feel it. But the drawback is, I'm not sure if the lighting or the camera is adequate quality. I didn't bring my microphone. I didn't bring my camera. So I'm just like speaking to you with the laptop only. So please forgive me for that. So if the quality is a little bit low, I know it could be a little glary and bright. I tried to clean off this thing. Maybe that helped a little bit. But no, the nature of the light here, did it help? Maybe it did. But the nature of the light here is it's just kind of glary, and maybe the sound quality is not that good. So before I go further, I just wanted to apologize if the quality is a little worse today. But hopefully the material will be okay. And I'm gonna ask for a bit of forgiveness. Okay, so anyway, having said that, let's just get right into some material now. So the next verse defines God with relation to the world and with relation to the individual souls. So that's where the free will question comes in. Because when we define God necessarily as a free being. Otherwise, it wouldn't be God. God is absolute, unlimited, and in a sense unchanging, because we want to maintain the incorrigible purity of God. But more importantly, God is free. If God wasn't free, what kind of God is it? Freedom and the absolute truth have always been synonyms. Think of beauty as a joy forever. Beauty is truth and truth is beauty. So there's a link between truth and beauty and joy. Insofar as God is eudaimonia, the ultimate good. In other words, insofar as God is the greatest joy and the most fulfillment that a person can have, as we can see in the lives of great mystics, insofar as that's how we define God, we have to also say that God is beautiful. because it's beauty that brings us joy. Notice it's an aesthetic argument that we're making. It's an axiological claim. God is good, but by good we mean fulfilling. And by fulfilling we mean beautiful. Notice anything that is beautiful is fulfilling, even if it makes you sad. Right? So like saying goodbye to everyone last night and today was sad. I was sad to see you all go, and I'm also sad to leave and not get breakfast here anymore for the foreseeable future because the breakfasts have been they really buttered my biscuit, literally. I've never tried a biscuit, but now I'm in the South and I tried a biscuit and it was, oh my God. Homemade biscuits fresh out of the oven by Jyoti Ma, like Goddess Annapurna incarnate. There's nothing like it. So of course it's a sad thing, first of all, because I'm saying goodbye to everyone and because I'm saying goodbye to the biscuits. But that doesn't mean it's suffering. It's sad and deeply meaningful. Yeah, no more biscuits. Tomorrow we have to leave at like 5 a.m. So we got a packed lunch of tamarind rice, and then we're just like out of here. We don't get to sit around and have breakfast like we do every day. And we've been here for like 6 days. So every single morning we've been sitting and having breakfast together and just like laughing and laughing and laughing. So it's not without a little bit of heaviness and poignance that we part ways and we say goodbye until next time. Parting is such sweet sorrow, Shakespeare said. What a beautiful phrase. Parting is such sweet sorrow, as if sorrow could be sweet, and it really can. And so that's why when we say for a thing to be fulfilling, it doesn't necessarily have to be pleasurable. Some people like to work out at the gym. It might not be pleasurable, but the discomfort they feel at the gym is fulfilling. Such sweet tapasya, you might say. Or like going to the temple sometimes, it can be such a drag in that you have to take so many buses, like Viranatha is hopping from bus to bus to bus, going from state to state, you know. And when you go to the temple, even there are many obstacles that are in your way. Maybe there are even some politics going on in the temple. There might be some drama. So there's a lot you have to put up with, but it's not a struggle. Even though it's difficult and tedious, and although you feel that way from time to time, like it's still worth it. Yeah, Supernama. Oh, thank you, Supernama. I'm happy. I'm happy that you said that. But yes, there's always an emotional hangover after such a divinely charged gathering, and you like feel that. But it's not bad. Just like it's not bad to struggle on your way to the temple, just like it's not bad to like work out at the gym. These things are not necessarily pleasurable. They're not necessarily happy in the way that some other things are, and yet they're deeply fulfilling. Why? Because they're beautiful. Yeah, it's a form of love, actually. So grief is not to be suffered, it's to be relished as another way in which our love for that person is expressing itself. So the same love is there. The same, in fact, that love is the same, but its intensity might have deepened. So grief is a gift. Everything is a gift. But notice what makes it a gift, what makes it fulfilling. That quality we humans have simply referred to as the beautiful. It's beautiful. So when you cry tears in the midst of some big event, but those tears are coming from a place of peace and a place of appreciation, not necessarily a place of agitation, then those tears are truly what makes life worth living. And so that thing we call the beautiful. And it's so pervasive that our whole life is based on it. Cuisine, it's enough to just eat, right? Actually, to just survive, it's enough to just eat. But the whole culinary world, the idea of like cuisine. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Today I needed it. There's so much talking. Like, thank you, thank you. So cuisine. It's so interesting because it's enough to just like eat food, but not for humans. We are looking for fulfillment beyond just the basic practical necessities of life. That's why materialism doesn't work. If this world was really just material, you can't explain this drive for this immaterial thing called beauty that makes people do such impractical things. So for the sake of having beautiful food, both in terms of presentation and in terms of flavor, there's no end to the troubles that people will take in order to be able to do that. They will conquer the whole world to get some spices. I often joke, I say, hey, you white people, you conquered everything, and you made my grandfather build a railway station for you so that you could transport spices. But the only one you ever use anyway is pumpkin spice. So what the fuck was all that about? You worked so hard for the spices. Use more in your cooking. Anyway, but notice, right? Like the fact that we just want our food to be beautiful and tasty and like it's worth so much. Similarly, it's enough to just like live in a house with some warmth, but it's not enough. I'm playing with you. It's not enough because we want more warmth. We want more uh, architecture. We want something beautiful. It's not enough that there's just a house that serves all of our practical needs. We want that house also to be beautiful. So we have interior designers, and we have entire traditions in India like Vastu Shastra, or otherwise known as Shilpa Shastra, which is all about harmonizing the house with the energies of the place, bringing in success, prosperity, wealth, basically Indian feng shui, But more importantly, making a place beautiful, because the beauty of a place is associated to its sacredness. There's something about beauty that's inherently sacred. So if it's good, it's good insofar as it's fulfilling, and if it's fulfilling, it's only fulfilling insofar as it's beautiful. So a thing of beauty is a joy forever, and truth has a beauty to it. So truth arguably would not be valuable for most of us if there wasn't a drive towards it that's innate to the human heart. And it doesn't have to be beautiful for it to be meaningful, but luckily it is. Swamiji said, what's the point of judging a truth based on its practical application? It's true or it isn't true. What does practical application have to do about it? So it's like a person saying, excuse me, raises a hand in the astronomy conference. Does your theory bring gingerbread? And the person says, no, it doesn't. It's a theory about black holes. It doesn't really necessarily mean you'll get gingerbread. And then the boy says, oh, then it's not true. See, that's a fallacy. Just because it doesn't get him what he wants doesn't mean it's not true. But sometimes we're like, oh, because it doesn't do the thing I need it to do, therefore it can't be true either. So Swamiji just ventures a proposition. Maybe things can be true but not beautiful, or true but not good. But thankfully, and even that would be okay. Even then, it would be worthwhile because the truth will set us free. It doesn't necessarily need to make us happy. It's still valuable in and of itself. But we're lucky because a thing of beauty is a joy forever, but also beauty is truth and truth is beauty, as John Keats told us. So that which we call God is the highest good because it's the most fulfillment. And by virtue of being the most fulfilling thing, it's also the most beautiful thing. And by virtue of being the most beautiful thing, it is also the most truthful thing. So instead of saying God is beautiful, we say God is beauty. Instead of saying God is truthful or that the truth will lead to God, we say I am the way, the truth, and the life. The Christ is the truth. God is the truth, so to speak. Some of you are getting April Fool's triggered a little bit because we had that Christ prank. But anyway, many of us feel like there is something in this life worth living for, and it's beyond just practical concerns of food and shelter and pleasure. And that thing we call God, just as a stand-in, as a placeholder word for our deeply held intuitions about beauty, about truth, and about the good. Okay, so let's just call it this. God is the goodest good, the most fulfilling fulfillment, and the most beautiful beauty, and the most truthful truth. So God is beauty, God is truth, God is love, which is another way of saying God is joy, which is another way of saying God is good. So this we know. This is a definition of God that's just intuitively felt. In fact, Saint Anselm's proof for God goes like this. We didn't really mention it. We mentioned it in the proof for God video, but we didn't really go into it too much. We didn't really discuss the whole proof for God thing from Anselm's point of view, but it's quite an elegant proof. It goes like this. So God by definition, so remember, lakshana, definition, God by definition is the greatest possible thing the mind can conceive. And this is what Swami Vivekananda said too. He said, God is the mind's highest reading of Maya. Can sit with that for hours. It's a profound statement. But okay, let's say God is the highest reading the mind can have of reality. That is to say, God is the greatest possible thing that you could conceive of. In fact, it's so refined that it's even beyond conception. But at least you can conceive that. So you can conceive that God is the inconceivable, glorious good. Okay? So now, the next point is, a thing that actually exists in real life is more glorious than a thing that only exists in your mind. Therefore, God must exist, by definition. Do you see? If you can conceive of God in your mind, and if by definition, by God, you mean the greatest possible thing, and since a thing that exists is greater than a thing that merely exists in your mind, therefore God must really exist. Otherwise, you would contradict your own definition. What an awesome argument. I like it. People have found problems with it, but I like it. It's based on a definition. It's an argument based on definition, and that definition uses a logical proof, pramana. And it's based on this axiom, like you have to accept that a thing that actually exists in the world is greater than a thing that exists in your mind. And I think most of us intuitively feel that. Like it's good if something exists in my mind. It's even better if it actually exists. And then all of us can experience it. So God, by virtue of being the greatest possible thing, cannot only exist in your mind, because that would contradict the definition. So I mean, it's exciting and stunning proof, but it's based on definition. And notice, where we're going with that is to say that in all cultures and in all traditions, we've had the same intuition about God, and we've defined God as such. And try as we might, we can't quite shake the idea. Somebody once said, It's a funny joke. They said, um, you see, there's a God-shaped hole in everyone's heart. When science came and killed religion, and that kind of religion had to die, thank God. Good riddance. But when science came and killed religion, it left a God-shaped hole in everyone's heart. So they tried to fill it with nature. They tried to fill it with art. They tried to fill it with all the things the secular world had to offer. Science and the pursuit of all manner of secular things. But look, nothing's happened. We're not fulfilled. Even the greatest philanthropist and humanitarian still feels something is missing. There will never be enough for us in this dharma, in this artha, in this kama. And sooner or later, we'll have to realize that. So the joke is, man has always had a God-shaped hole in his heart. He's tried at times to fill it with art. He's tried at times to fill it with science, but nothing will do. And you know what the Buddhists did? They tried to fill a God-shaped hole with a hole-shaped God. Because nothing, shunyata. In Buddhism, God is zero, shunyata. They try to fill a God-shaped hole with a hole-shaped God. But it's still God, it's still an absolute reality. You're still trying to find that which you consider to be the inconceivably great, the most great thing your mind could ever consider. So that can be called Buddha nature, it can be called Dharmakaya, it can be called God. Just remember, the word God is a placeholder name. That's why Brahman is very helpful. It's a new word, and it frees you from some of the religious trauma that might be associated to the word God for you. Because many of us have had a hard experience with that. So therefore, we don't need to use the word God, we can just say reality or Buddha nature. But for now, at this point in the lecture, it's important just to point out that whatever word you use, probably what you mean is that goodest good, that most fulfilling fulfillment, beauty in and of itself, and truth in and of itself. So this is called God. And not only is God good, God is. In fact, to say God is automatically implies God is good, because that's built into the definition of God. So how about that? Vivekananda actually called it the ideal unit abstraction, meaning we all have a different word for this abstract ideal, but we all have the ideal. And it's universal. So it's not up to each individual to relativistically figure out what the meaning of life is. Everyone has the same meaning in life, which is to attain that by which nothing higher can be had, and through which no sorrow will be able to shake you. So everyone, no matter what, however they like to describe it, everyone is looking for the same thing. Atyantika dukkha nivritti, a permanent cessation of suffering, which doesn't necessarily mean the end of grief and pain, although it can mean that, it doesn't have to mean that. And then secondly, they're looking for paramananda prapti. So it's not enough that they get dukkanta, the end of suffering. It's also important that they attain everlasting joy, a deep, meaningful fulfillment that doesn't go away. So these two things, the categorical end of all suffering and the attainment of the highest wisdom or the highest joy or the highest beauty, these two things are the aspiration of every individual soul. However they might like to phrase it. So some people are looking for that through music. Some people are looking for that through science. Some are looking for it consciously, and those you call spiritual aspirants. Some are looking for it unconsciously, and those you call worldly people. There's no real difference. Both of them are looking for the same thing. Some stumble into it, some consciously attain it. But either way, they're all looking for it. They all want it, and they'll never be fulfilled until they have it. That's just what God means, whatever word you choose to use. Um, yeah, so that's why I think the game of logic is very problematic, as Raliji is pointing out here. There's a phrase in Sanskrit, tarka adhishtanaha, which means logic is without ground. Sooner or later, you'll just get into a kind of masturbatory, pushing your glasses up the nose kind of thing. It'll be like, well, actually, according to this definition in this textbook, your argument, which is based on that definition in that textbook, is wrong. So, for instance, there's one place where a great master gave a few definitions for what it is to be a human. Not an easy thing to do. I think Aristotle defined us as rational animals, featherless bipeds, rational featherless bipeds, right? And so to define what a human is important because once you define what a human is, you can understand better what a human should do. Before you know what your life is for, you have to know what you are. And so defining the human is a very big deal in philosophy and very difficult to do because your definition can't be too broad, nor can it be too narrow. It has to be just right. So there's a philosopher who gave various definitions for what it is to be a human, and another philosopher who came right after, Sri Harsha, who one by one disputed all of those definitions. That's why when it comes down to definitions, it comes down to definitions. And so here, we're choosing to define God as that which is most fulfilling, that which is most good by virtue of being most beautiful, and that we are choosing to call truth. And then we're saying, by definition, that's the God who we call an intelligent agent, asti karta. And why? Because it requires an intelligent agent to have a complex effect. So based on this lakshana, this definition, there is now a pramana, some kind of evidence or some kind of reason offered. And what kind of God? A God that destroys, therefore Rudra. Okay, so this is the first, arguably the first axiom of Shaivism. There is God, and that God is Shiva, because the destroyer is necessarily also the creator. He alone is. That's one way to look at it. Okay, now we're coming to the second verse, which is a tatastha lakshana, meaning it's an indirect definition, but that's going to explain our role in all of this. Like, who are we to God? And by understanding God and by understanding me, then we can understand what to do, what spiritual life really looks like. So, part of this lecture, it's kind of interesting because I'd like to propose a bhava. Essentially, a bhava means an attitude or a framework through which you can look at life and look at yourself. So, what I'm going to say now might not necessarily need to be true, but it might be true in terms of bhava. It might be true as a bhava, or it might be helpful as a bhava. So I'd like to offer that the next part of this lecture can be taken on purely pragmatic terms. We might not be able to prove it, and there are some people who have quite convincingly proved it. I'm going to try to prove determinism, absolute determinism in one way, and then I'm going to try to prove absolute free will in another. But it will still feel on this level to be pure determinism. Because ultimately, as a bhakta, as a jiva, I'm a determinist. On a jnana point of view, I assert absolute freedom because God, by definition, is freedom and God alone exists, so only freedom is. But in terms of my experience as a bhakta, as a devotee of God, when I identify with this body and mind, then it feels to me that in this moment, I can of my own self do nothing. God alone acts through me, as the Christ said. And that's true of each and every one of us. And the only difference is whether we recognize it or not. So, from a bhakti bhava point of view, I'm going to try to argue for hard determinism. But other people have argued for it on scientific grounds. And it's quite convincing, actually. So, there are two places that I might invite you to look. One of them is Benjamin Lippett's studies. So he's done a lot of studies in like a scientific context, like neuroscience context, about free will. And he's come to the conclusion that there isn't any. There's only the illusion of free will. We feel like we have free will, but we don't actually have free will. That's what his science shows. Like the neurosynaptic firing occurs even before the prefrontal cortex has had a registering of that decision. So you've decided even before you know you've decided. And we'll get into that in just a moment. But then there's another author, Zelensky. Oh my God, what? Not Zelensky. Fuck. What was his name? Um, that just kind of part of. No, he's not a world leader. What's his name? I just had it and it just got out of my mind. Determined book. The book is called Determined. Oh, sorry, Sapolsky. What? Sapolsky. So the book is by Sapolsky. Um, It's called Determined, A Science of Life Without Free Will. Robert Sapolsky. So that's a book in which he tries to prove on scientific and philosophical grounds that there is no free will in this universe. So these are good books for determinism from a more scientific, more secular point of view. So Benjamin Lippett's studies are purely neurological and psychological, and Sapolsky's book is purely philosophical and also scientific. He uses science a lot. Like many modern philosophers, they premise their arguments based off of science. Like Malcolm Gladwell, for instance, he looks at research in psychology and sociology and whatnot. So it has that bhava, but essentially this very academic sort of literature more and more corroborates this idea in science, in psychology, in sociology. There is no free will. And this is an idea that Sri Ramakrishna time and time again repeated. So it's a bhava that Sri Ramakrishna himself championed and lived through, and it's a bhava that he himself taught. The bhava that only God is, and only God is doing everything through everyone, including all the evil stuff. So it's kind of a complex topic because it involves discussing not only free will, but the problem of evil as well. Like if God is doing everything, then God is responsible for even evil things. And that's something Sri Ramakrishna will wholeheartedly accept. In fact, a Shakta who worships Ma Kali has no problem with the idea of God doing such things. But those who want to insist that God is only good and not the destroyer, see, it's all related to this idea that God is also the destroyer. Those who think that God is only the creator and not the destroyer, they need to invent free will. Because only through free will can you absolve God of the responsibility of all the genocides that have been committed. And many of them in his name too. So, this is a very deep conversation. This conversation about do I or do I not have free will? And if I don't, how do you explain God? Because a lot of evil stuff happens. How can God be all good then? So it's a very deep question. Anyway, Rumama, I see that you have your hand up. And is this the same? No, Rama, this is Rama from just now.
Okay.
Is it the same Rama?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, it's the same one from earlier. I have two questions.
Oh, but Ma, two things. One, I can't really hear you too well. It's like kind of
Um,
like you're underwater. And a second thing, if you could just hold off for a little bit, we do have a Q&A.
Okay.
Yeah, so let me just get through a bunch of material, and then once I'm done with the material, let's plunge into a Q&A. So just bear with me for a few moments. Yeah, if you could write down, that'd be really helpful. Okay, so let's get into the material now. It's a deep question. Is there free will? So Sri Ramakrishna, he defined Jivan Mukta in the following way. It's actually a profound idea. Jiva means individual soul, Mukta means liberated. So what is a liberated soul? See, many people ask, what is enlightenment? And well, when will I know when I have it? So is it something that you can measure? Is it even a thing? Is there such a thing called enlightenment? You know, Gaudapada in the Mandukya Karika, he says there is no such thing as a seeker after enlightenment, and there is no such thing as an enlightened being. Na mumukshu, na muktaha. This is the highest truth. This is what Gaudapada says. But he didn't say there was no enlightenment. See, enlightenment is the recognizing that there is no seeker and no sought. It's the recognizing of Advaita. So in Gaudapada's worldview, there's only one. And so the illusion of there being a seeker and the illusion of there being enlightenment, that goes away with the realization of this one. So this one is called enlightenment in and of itself. Once you know that truth, you don't remain anymore as an enlightened person. You know, like your personhood is gone, having recognized that you are everybody. So in a sense, it's a paradox. It's a contradiction in terms. But just Seth has the answer here. Sri Ramakrishna had his own definition for the enlightened soul, and he repeated it throughout the gospel. And it's a definition I quite like because it's so simple and so direct and so testable. You know, it's something that we can really, really use in our day-to-day life to see how far we've come in spiritual life. Oh, really? This is from the Vedanta Society. Oh, Jaima! Cheers to all the red cups in the world. I'm very partial to red cups and black cups. Surprise, surprise. Anyway, yeah, Jaima, Asha Devi, Jaima. Toasting to God as the goodest good. So here we have this idea that enlightenment can be defined, and many people have defined it. There are many different definitions. By the way, how would yoga define enlightenment? As follows: Tada drashtu sarupe avasthanam, when the seer abides in his true nature. So actually, yoga describes enlightenment as the acquisition of jnana, some kind of insight, which is a state in which the seer abides in itself. Tada sarupe avasthanam. And how does that come about? Drashta, the seer, abides avastha in the state of selfhood, swarupa, in its own essence nature, through yoga. And yoga, by definition, another lakshana, swarupa lakshana, is the complete cessation of the mind. This is samadhi. So yoga means nirvikalpa samadhi, which is yoga chitta vritti nirodha. So that chitta vritti nirodha is the means and arguably the ends by which one attains knowledge of the true self. So enlightenment in yoga is defined as abiding in your true nature, permanently, uninterruptedly, unceasingly. Na dukena gurunapi vichalyate, such that not even the heaviest sorrow can shake you, as Sri Krishna points out in chapter 6 of the Gita. Anyway, having said that, Sri Ramakrishna's definition is very simple and very straightforward. He says, the one who knows that God alone is the doer is free. So the definition, according to Sri Ramakrishna, of a Jivan Mukta, a person who is completely liberated, is a person who realizes fully that God alone is the doer. And for this, Sri Ramakrishna would like to point to a song. Thakur Sri Ramakrishna used to teach through music a lot. And we actually had a nice discussion just now about it. Like, why music? What's the specific advantage of learning spirituality through music? And we had a nice discussion earlier on that topic. But here, putting that aside for a moment, we have to recognize that when Sri Ramakrishna taught, he taught through music, but he chose songs which had the bhava that he was trying to teach. And it's quite telling that his favorite songs tend to have this bhava. The bhava of God alone is the doer, I can of my own self do nothing. And that's something that Christ used to say a lot too. Everything that I do, my Father in heaven does through me. So Sri Ramakrishna would love to sing that Ram Prasad song, very famous one. Shakale tumari cha. And there's a line in that song where it goes, Tumi rati amirata. You are the driver and I am the carriage. And there's another line that says, Tumi jantri ami jantro, which is a Bengali accent for yantra. You are the yantri and I am the yantra. Yantra means machine. So you, O God, are the operator, the user, and I am the machine, the device. Tumi jantri ami yantra. Mother, I move as you make me move, and I speak as you make me speak. This is a Ram Prasad song. Remember, Sri Ramakrishna loved singing Ram Prasad songs because, as Swami Ambikananda Saraswati put it, Sri Ramakrishna is very much in the same bhavik lineage. Not necessarily the same parampara, but the same bhavik lineage as Ram Prasad. They're both devotees of the Divine Mother, and they have a very similar idea about what that looks like, or what to tell their students about. So, therefore, Sri Ramakrishna, when he's teaching his disciples, who he never considered his disciples, by the way. He just saw them as God themselves, but if God herself. But when he was teaching, he liked to sing Ramprasad songs. He himself loved Ramprasad songs when he was a priest, but when he was teaching, especially, he used them for their pedagogical value because Ramprasad was very fond of putting secrets and teachings, tantric sadhanas, in his songs so that they could reach the common people in the Bengali script without having to, like, you don't have to have Sanskrit knowledge. You can just learn Bengali songs in your native tongue and you would learn all the secrets of Tantra because that's the grace of somebody like Ram Prasad. Anyway, having said all that, he loved this song, Shakali Tumaricha, and he would quote it a lot, even when he wasn't singing it. Even when he was giving this teaching and hadn't sang the song, he would quote it. And so often, what Sri Ramakrishna teaches are quotes from songs. Reminds me a bit of the movie Transformers, the one that first came out with Shia LaBeouf, like way back when Linkin Park just put out that album and the soundtrack was the Minutes to Midnight album, right? Like that lives somewhere in your subconscious. Like we're burying something, like whereas like, do you remember Minutes to Midnight? That was formative for some people. But it was probably when you were like 20 or maybe no, probably 12 or 14 or 15 or something, some of you. Anyway, I was probably 14 or 15 or 12. I was probably 12. I don't know. Anyway, historicity is always a complicated thing with Indian history and with our own histories. But the point here is that there was a character in that film, Bumblebee, who would speak through the radio. Like he would talk to Shia LaBeouf's character like just through sound bites and clips and snippets of things that were already in the media. Sometimes Sri Ramakrishna taught that way. He would just speak like song quotes. And he would often say, Mother, I move as you make me move. I speak as you make me speak. I am the house, you are the indweller. I am the machine, you are the operator. I am the carriage, you are the driver. Like that. He had this attitude of being completely surrendered to the Divine Mother. Mother's incredibly happy child. You know, ecstatic, full of ecstatic joy. Mother Kali's happy boy. There's a line that Swami Bhajanananda Saraswati shared with me from a song that he heard when he was very young in a yoga studio where it was all about Sri Ramakrishna, but it wasn't at all affiliated to the order. Anyway, so this idea that Sri Ramakrishna exemplified in his own life complete surrender to God, and he would often tell people that this was the way, there's complete surrender, to be more like a kitten than a monkey. The monkey holds on to its parent for dear life, and the monkey's mother swings through the trees, and if the monkey were to loosen its grip, it would fall and be dashed to the earth. Transmutation, yes. He taught in memes, it's true. Transmutation. Exactly that. Yeah, so so this idea of surrender, Sri Ramakrishna, he described it in terms of like a monkey which has to hold to the mother. That monkey is not surrendered. It has to use a lot of self-effort because if it were to let go, it would fall and be dashed to the rocks. Whereas the kitten, it doesn't hold on to the mother. The mother holds on to the kitten. The mother takes the kitten by the scruff of its neck and then lifts it and puts it here now and then puts it there later. So Sri Ramakrishna said we should be like that kitten. We should only say mew mew, content to be left anywhere in the house by our mother. She picks us up and now puts us on the bed. Good, mew mew. She picks us up and now puts us in the kitchen. Mew mew, like that. At no point are we grabbing her. She is grabbing us and moving us this way and moving us that way. And so we can just surrender to her will. Now, it's not so easy because say you want to be on the bed and then she puts you on the bed, then it's easy to say mew mew, no problem. But say you don't want to be in the kitchen and she puts you in the kitchen, then how will you say mew mew? That's a difficult thing. So to accept the will of God means to unequivocally accept the will of God in all places at all times, including the times that the mind rejects. So it's quite an advanced sadhana because the level of selflessness that it requires is quite significant. To be able to say, do with me what thou wilt. May thy will alone be done. I am a servant, completely a servant of the Divine Mother, which means being willing to do work you don't want to do. That's the idea. Like, can we really be so equanimous that in each and every circumstance, no matter what is happening, we can see it as God's will, not only accept it as God's will, but also celebrate it as God's will? Which brings us to the topic of the problem of evil, naturally. Because what about things in this life that are really egregious? How can we recognize God's will there? So the point I want to make first, though, before we get into that discussion, is this. The definition of enlightenment, according to Sri Ramakrishna, is this: seeing mother as the doer. Mother alone is the doer. That's a very helpful definition because it works outside of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. In Nirvikalpa Samadhi, that definition won't work because there is no mother there. There is no you there. There is no world there. There is no action there. Arguably, in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, you are the Divine Mother. The Divine Mother is you. There is no more mother and child. There is just pure existence, conscious bliss. It cannot be described. A salt doll went to measure the depths of the ocean. It dissolved. What could it say of the ocean? So here, the definition won't work. But everything short of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, I think it's a great definition. In fact, it's good for Nirvikalpa Samadhi too, because in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, obviously there are no thoughts whatsoever, but even that has happened by the will of the Divine Mother. The Mother alone chooses to open her eyes and project the world, and she alone chooses to close her eyes and withdraw it into the deep yoga nidra of Samadhi. So, whether it's Milana or Unmesha, the blooming of the universe, or Nimesha, Nimilana, the closing of the eyes and the contraction of the universe. In both cases, it's all the will of the Divine Mother. So either you are the mother and you feel it to be your will, or, as is the case with most of us, most of the time we feel like we are mother's child. Outside of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, it's hard to feel that you are the Divine Mother, especially when you have a clear definition of what that means. A lot of people, they claim Advaita so easily because they bring God down. So it's easier to say I am that. But if you keep God there as a theistic tradition might, then you have to be that. And so you realize it's in Nirvikalpa Samadhi alone that you are that. Everything else outside of that, it feels a bit more wholesome and more spiritually nourishing to say, I'm a devotee, simple child of God, and now God is the greatest, most fulfilling, most beautiful truth in the universe, and I'm relating to that in the spirit of surrender and total self-effacement. So outside Nirvikalpa Samadhi, it's a hell of a definition, right? And you can use it in your own life to see to what extent you've made spiritual progress. So the more equanimity you bring to each and every situation, arguably that argues the more trust you have in God. So any kind of worry, anxiety, despair, all of this betrays a lack of trust in God. When you truly are convinced of God's existence, which arguably presupposes some experience, some tangible and meaningful experience of God, then you will never worry ever again. Why should you worry? It's not Lord God looking after you kind of thing. So the Christ, this is one of the central tenets of his teaching too. He would say, look at the sparrows. They don't care what they eat or where they sleep or anything like that, and yet the Lord looks after them. Are ye not better than sparrows? Or he would say, look at these lavender. No, sorry, this lily. Look at this lily. It doesn't spin or weave, and yet even King Solomon, his ancestor actually, even King Solomon is not clad in raiment finer than this. So Christ, of course, he's teaching simplicity, but he's also teaching faith. Simplicity comes from a childlike, guileless sense of surety in their mother. So I often think about the child playing in the playground. Usually she'll look over her shoulder to check that her mother is sitting there on the bench behind her. So the mother will be there talking and maybe gossiping with her friend. And then this is how it was for a young Indian boy. Our mothers sit together in the park and we play, but obviously they're all there like kind of talking about life and like, usually gossiping. But when you look back, even if your mother is not looking at you, she's intently hearing about some kind of affair and some kind of household, she's listening. You feel safe just knowing that she's there, knowing that if you were to shut out, she would hear you and she would run to your aid. And knowing that she's there, even when she's not watching you, just knowing that she's there, it emboldens you. And then you go do some crazy trick for your friends or something like that. You know what I'm talking about? Like you feel safer knowing that you're being watched and that you're being held. Just like that, one who knows that God exists and more importantly knows that God is one's own mother, such a person, what should they fear? It's like being in a park and knowing your mother is right behind you. So you can really be bold. You can swing on the monkey bars, you can play, and, sufficient unto the day is the worries thereof. Think not of tomorrow. Something like that. So the Christ often taught us to be simple, to be guileless, not to worry about tomorrow, to trust God, as my friends say, let go, let God. And more importantly, with that comes cheerfulness. By not worrying about tomorrow, by trusting God completely, one becomes a very light being, a very innocent being, and a very playful being, just like a child. A child who is sure of the safety and love of their parents. which of course, psychologically speaking, some of us might not have experienced actually. But with God, it's not like human parents. Once we feel God, and most importantly, once we feel God's love, which we can feel through God's people. So when we meet like Jyotima, for instance, or Sadhikama, some of you met, true devotees. When you meet people like that, you realize that you are loved unconditionally. There's nothing you can do to lose their love, and there's nothing that you really needed to do to gain it either. And when you meet people like that, however bad your own physical parents might have been, your biological parents might have been, you start to understand what real parenting looks like. And you forgive your parents, you forgive everyone, because that real love really heals us. And that real love, that unconditional love that flows from God's devotee, is really a hint of God's love. So meeting God's devotees, going to God's holy places, exposing your mind to holy ideas, all of these are important so you can get that flavor, that feeling, that bhava of not only God's existence, but also of God's unconditional love. Taking refuge in that, you become so bold, so free, so carefree, dare I say it. Carefree. Because God's looking after everything. And you become playful because God is the eternal playmate. So we were talking about that Swamiji essay, Ever Yours in Madness, Vivekananda. There he describes God as the funniest chap you ever saw. All of this is play, you see, and you're God's playmate. So once you're convinced of God's existence, you feel absolutely safe. Nothing unreal exists. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. You have that peace, the peace that passeth all understanding, that safety. So you could be financially in a very tight spot. You'll never worry about it. Why? Why should you worry? God will take care of you. Is she not your father? Are you not better than these sparrows? If you have no place to stay, you'll never worry about it. And if think people are being mean to you, you'll never worry about it. If you don't know what to say, you trust that you'll know when you get there. Like that. This is what Christ told his disciples. He told them to go and preach, and they were like, "What will we say?" He'll say, "You'll know when we get there." When you get there. I mean, like, it takes tremendous faith to be like, okay, whatever. You work your will, and I'm here for it. To be able to say to God, I'm showing up for it. And then to recognize that even I don't have any will there. It's by your grace and your will alone that I've come to be an instrument of your will. So all of this to say, the definition of enlightenment, according to Sri Ramakrishna, is the clear, abiding, steady, and uninterrupted feeling that God alone is the doer. And everything that happens by God's will, by her own sweet will, for her own sweet play. And I don't have to understand it. I don't even have to like it. But because of this attitude, I probably will enjoy it as God's play. I can look around and say, look at what God is doing through all of these people. Look at what God is doing through me. She alone is the doer. I take no credit. And then what we're doing is called karma yoga, where we're doing things just for their own sake, without any desire to gain anything, without any fear of losing anything. We're doing it just to enact the will of God, which is moving us now this way, moving us now that way. And all the while we say mew, 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 or ma, ma, ma. So when a person feels themselves to be the instrument, when they feel like they are the machine and God is the operator, when they truly feel like they are the carriage and God is the driver, when they feel like they are the house and God is the indweller, when they move as she makes them move, when they speak as she makes them speak, then that person is enlightened. And just imagine what kind of life that is. It's a life of flow, if you will, where every action is so spontaneous and so natural and so in the moment. Everything is so present and so alive and so vital. Not even one moment is spent dawdling in the imaginary future or lingering in some imagined past. It's a life of spanda, exactly. A life of true resonance and dynamism and excitement. And that's what sometimes we feel when we come together and we sit around a fire, or just now it was just so wonderful to like throw flower petals in the temple. And it's just like this absurd moment of here we all are giggling, throwing flower petals at each other. We had a bit of like a holy with petals, and everyone's laughing and delighted. And there's nothing to it. There's no past before that moment. There's no future after that moment. There is just the spanda, the vibration and pulsation and joy of that moment. Because it's a joy that comes from God by being in God. Only moments in God are eternal. All else is a passing show. So having said that, Sarada Devi said that. It's important to remember that this bhava should bring joy because it eliminates all worry and all anxiety. And it brings joy because it keeps you in the presence of that which is joy inducing, love itself, God, who is love. So, anyway, this Sri Ramakrishna felt was the highest state of maturity, spiritual maturity. It's when the ego, by the way, the ego is not gone, because only in Nirvikalpa Samadhi is the ego gone. But here, the ego is still there. In fact, like Hanuman or Vivekananda, it might be a very developed ego, but it's entirely a servant of the Lord. So the ego, the rascal ego, as Sri Ramakrishna would say, has been made the Lord's servant, the Lord's child, the Lord's friend. That ego, Sri Ramakrishna said, won't hurt anybody. So you're free. Notice, this is why Jivan Mukta is such a complex idea. How can a person be free as long as there's a limitation of the body? How can they be free as long as the mind is limited? How can they be free as long as there's any trace of ego left? No, no, no. No freedom can be had here. One can only attain freedom after kicking the body, after kicking the mind, after attaining something like merging into Brahman and Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Only then can a person be free. Notice, then this is a kind of videha mukti, which means a liberation that you can only have after you kick the body, after you die. And most spiritual traditions are like this. They argue that like what's there to be had is a videha mukti, which means while you're in the body you can do your practices, but it's only when you die that you get your full liberation. As long as you're alive, you can make a lot of progress, but you can't be liberated per se, because there's still the problem of ego. At the very least, the ego, if not also everything else, the body, the mind. But we say, no, the ego can be there, the mind can be there, the body can be there, still you can be free. So the Jivan Mukta, it's a paradox. The two words are, it's oxymoronic. Jiva means actually bound, pashu, and Mukta means free. So how can you say free bound? Both free and bound at the same time? We mean to say exactly that. In one sense, you are free because you are nothing but mother. But in another sense, you are still this body, still this mind, still this person. That's why Sri Ramakrishna's definition of enlightenment is so, so important. Because it can be used as a metric in each and every moment to gauge our progress. So here's the definition. A person who feels themselves to be God's instrument, who feels that God alone is the doer, that person is free. And notice, with this comes a metaphysical statement too. And he said it in another place. He said, not even a leaf moves without the will of God. That is to say, God doesn't just create the universe and like fuck off. That's kind of our view. Like God creates the universe and then steps back and is like, okay, let's see what's going to happen here. Oh, there's a genocide over there. That's an interesting choice. Hell button. And then, oh, look at that person, helping out the puppy that got trapped in the tree. Heaven button. So we think that God is just sitting there watching the world and waiting to see what people are going to do with their free will. And if they make good choices, good, they can be rewarded. And if they made bad choices, bad, they'll be eternally punished. What kind of a God is that? If such a God exists, I will not worship it. I'll fight it. I'll happily lead the charge myself, if not join up with Lucifer and revolt, right? I much prefer a hell in which I can be free than a heaven in which I have to serve that kind of God. Some notice me senpai, like obsessive God who just like created a world so he would have some friends. What a lonely schmuck. It would have been better if he left well and good alone. The fact that he did this, all of this just for your love, what? He gave you free will, so 9 out of 10 times you could start genocides, and 1 out of 10 times you could choose God of your own free will, and oh, it's so worth it. It's worth it. Look at my one saint. He chose me in the meadows of Italy, and now somehow it makes all the genocides okay. No, it's not a sufficient response to the problem of evil to say that God is willing to trade off so much evil for the sake of one saint. What a nonsense proposition. It's like the rest of us have to suffer genocides just so someone can freely choose God. What kind of a notice me senpai person would need someone to freely choose them only to feel loved? All of this doesn't seem like good characterization for God, right? So how can God give free will if the only reason for giving it is so that we can freely choose him? God so loved people, so he gave them free will. You think a mother so loves you that she's willing to give you car keys, a credit card, and some cocaine, and it's like, have at it? Is that love? I love you so much, so here, wreck yourself with these. It's not love, it's negligence. God so loved us, so he gave us free will, so he wouldn't be a tyrant. Yeah, your parents so loved you, so that they wouldn't be a tyrant, so they neglected you. You don't call them bad parents, actually. Parents were like that. So, insofar as God is the greatest good, that can't be God. Insofar God is freedom itself, God cannot be bound to this desire, which is limiting. This desire that you should choose him freely, or this desire that you should choose him at all, freely or not. Why should he need you to choose him? Why should he need you to worship him? Why should he enter into covenants with you? If he was really God, what could he possibly have to gain from you? And what could you possibly have to give to him? All already belongs to him. Why does he need to trade with you? He only needs to trade with you and reason with you if you have free will. But you only have free will because he gave it to you. And why would he give it to you? So that you could start genocides? Surely not. Yeah, by the way, give me your firstborn. So, like, that's all cool. There's a lot of meaning to that. We can unpack it. But a lot of the times, this definition of God doesn't work. When you define God as free, and then you define him as desirous of your love, desirous of you to freely choose him, then you contradict his freedom. If you say God is all good, but there is such a thing as eternal hell, again, you contradict your own definition. So, in terms of definition, and in terms of the claims that are made based on that definition, something doesn't quite fit. the religion of love becomes a religion of punishment, and you realize there's a hypocrisy there. You can't both define God as the greatest good and then also make him the author of hell. You can't both say he's a good parent and then also accept that he's negligent. You can't also say that he's free and full and then accept that he's bound to the desire of wanting devotees and wanting devotees to freely choose him. All of this contradicts the definition of God. So therefore, free will is a pretty thin argument, but it's needed. It's needed because without free will, then humans will, not take responsibility for their actions. They'll just use this as an excuse and say God made me do it, the devil made me do it, or worse. If it's true that God alone is doing this, then how do you explain all the things that seem to be more likely the devil's work? How do you explain God's evil in the world? That's always a question in the back of our minds when we talk about free will, because free will is almost always invoked in order to justify the evil in the world, to save God. God didn't do it, people did. Right? Like that. Okay. But our claim in response to that is, well, if God knew that that was going to happen by giving people free will, even though it produced one or two saints here and there, it doesn't absolve God fully, because God knew it was going to happen. She knew that it was a result of free will, and by choosing to give free will anyway, she consents to that outcome, since God knows all time by definition. So anyway, having said all this, Sri Ramakrishna says something quite dramatic, and this is a hardcore determinism, which I would call absolute theism leading to hard determinism. So speaking more technically and philosophically here, here's how it goes. God is the singular reality in the universe, and not even a leaf moves but by her will. It's not the case that God creates the universe and then just stands back and leaves it alone. Rather, God is present in the universe as the universe, and everything that happens, she is directly involved in. So it's not like she sets up a machine and pushes a button and the machine just mechanistically goes. So there's this clockmaker metaphor where God designs the world like a clockmaker designs a clock and then just pushes a button and then the clock starts. But now the clockmaker doesn't have to be actively involved in this process anymore. The activity ended when the clock was made. And then it ended when the button was pushed. Then the clockmaker just stands back and can watch the time. The clock will work on its own. So this is usually the metaphor of the universe that we get. So the universe is like a very complex clock, and God designed everything prior to time, and then push the button, the game begins, time starts, and God fucks off and waits for you to choose him. But that's not the view that Sri Ramakrishna presented. Rather, Sri Ramakrishna would say God is in the world as the world. He used the word hoi chin in Bengali to mean God has become the world. Once M asked him, is this world an illusion? His response was, why should it be an illusion? God herself has become the 24 principles of Sankhya. In other words, God, hoi chin, has manifested the world as an expression of her true innate being. So having said that then, even this moment is suffused with God's presence, and therefore God's presence impels me to say certain things and for you to understand certain things. Like everything is happening by the grace of God alone. What I can say and what I can say clearly and succinctly and successfully is determined entirely by God. And what you will hear of what I have to say, what you will understand, and how you will apply it is again entirely up to God. In fact, in one place, Sri Ramakrishna explains something to M, and he asks M, do you understand this? And M says, I think I understand it, sir. And he immediately says, Sri Ramakrishna immediately says, it is by the grace of the Divine Mother alone that you understand this. You see, you could buy 100 books, and Swamiji points out that you will only read the books that you deserve to read. He's talking from the point of view of karma, but from another point of view, you'll only read the books of those 100 books that you bought and the Divine Mother wants you to read and allows you to read. You bought 100 books, but you never got to read more than 10. Why those 10? Why was it that you had the grace to read 10 as opposed to like 20 or 30 or all 100? Well, again, it all comes down to the Divine Mother. We think that by buying 100 books, we'll read 100 books, but we realize that actually we only read 1 or 10 of them. We all have this experience. And so in spiritual life also, we think that things should happen according to our schedule. But then we practice and we practice and practice and nothing happens. Someone else just starts the practice this week and next week they're fully realized. What's up with that? And then we realize it's God's will alone. That everything is happening by her will. The person chooses to buy the books by her will. She only gets to read 10 of them by her will. What she understands of what she read is again by her will. How she applies, how she remembers, retains, integrates, and applies what she read is again by God's will. And what happens as a result of that is, again, God's will. At no point of the process is God's will absent. And if God's will is present at every point of the process, at no point is your will present. Do you see? If God's will is never absent, then your will was never present. So now let me make a few arguments for this. If there was such a God, and you were something other than God, here's the problem. your very being negates God's absolute being. For God to absolutely be, God must be everywhere all the time. But if you're here and if you're different from God, then God is everywhere, every time, except here as you. Like your being is a limit to God because God is now everything but you. So that can't be. If God by definition is absolute, meaning all pervasive and eternally present, then where you're standing, God is also standing. Isn't that a beautiful idea? That if you are something other than God, by definition, that contradicts God. Because God, by definition, is absolute, and absolute means all pervasive. Therefore, you cannot be beside God. You cannot be different from God. So God must be everyone, everything, all pervasively, always. Mm. And yeah, and Asha is pointing out here, like, once we get this, in one sense, it's so liberating and so wonderful. You're like, wait a minute, I'm held. Right now, I'm held. And who hasn't had this experience of being in like a really dire situation and just praying and just getting an answer? Many people have changed their whole lives and become die-hard Christians because of a single experience like this. I just spoke to somebody who said their family were not religious, but then something happened and the mother was in a hard time and some change of circumstance occurred and she claims that it was because of Christ. She prayed to Christ once out of desperation and then everything was fixed and she was a staunch die-hard believer from that point on. Sometimes this kind of thing can change a person's whole life, but very few people in this world actually have lived their lives without this kind of serendipity from time to time. They felt what it's like to be held. And so imagine feeling that all the time, to know that I never have to worry because when I get there, I'll know. Or something will happen and lead me the way that I'm supposed to go, which means you have to surrender your own expectation of outcomes. You have to remember that everything is happening by God's will, if not for your highest good, then for her greatest pleasure. And obviously, this latter is more important. So you just allow it. You're like, sure, Ma, if you are going to make me so, so rich and so, so powerful, fine. Haha, Sai, you're right. No atheist on death row. It's true. Even Camus Marceau, who is pretty much an atheist, on death row, he contemplates his presence in the universe and the idea of interbeing and has a religious experience as he's walking out to the gallows in the L'Etranger book, right? Anyway, um, if God is going to make us really rich and really powerful, fine. And if He's going to make us destitute and sick and despairing, fine. Also, again, it's entirely her will. We have to accept it. Now, not only accept it, celebrate it. Because if we love her, we also want her to get her way. Naturally. That's one bhava. Anyway, there's another idea here, which is like, you will be cheerful all the time. Even if bad stuff happens, because Ma's getting her way. So there's a Ram Prasad song where he says, is this the reward for worshipping you, mother? One who praises you gets beaten twice as hard. He's being sarcastic here, but he's saying like, I don't mind. Is this what I get for loving you? Okay, I'll keep loving you. Why not? I can't help but love you. And then in another place, he says, this is what one gets from worshipping you, mother, a begging bowl and a loincloth. It's another cute idea. That maybe love for God will ruin you. And that's the idea from the book of Job. When we love God for God's sake, we don't say me, me anymore. We say ma, ma. And that's important because then we're not looking for something out of our devotion. Usually when we're devoted, we want it to lead to some better life. Like we want us to at least be psychologically better or something. We're always looking for some kind of outcome in our devotion. This Swamiji calls sanctified shopkeeping. Where there is desire, where there is fear, there is no love. So if you fear Kali, that's not devotion. And if you desire things from Kali, if you desire things from Ma, then it's not Ma, it's me. What can Ma do for me? As opposed to what can I do for Ma? So when you flip the script, you realize it's not out of desire or fear that we approach her, it's out of love. And if it's out of love, then it's out of complete surrender. So therefore, if even the worst stuff happens, what can you do? You know, you loved her and you so loved her, so therefore you worshipped her. Who cares for the outcome of that worship? So having said all of this then, Sri Ramakrishna was the perfect example for this because whatever would happen in his life, he would smilingly and joyfully accept it. And Swami Vivekananda is, of course, a perfect example of this too. So these great bhaktas, jnanis, you'll see that they all carry with them a sense of surrender. Either because they think the world is unreal, or because they feel the world is real and that God is real and that God is super, super present in each and every moment. Yeah, this and Rudra Deva, we were just talking about that just now. It's from Gaudapada. Gaudapada's commentary on the Mandukya Upanishad, he says, Na muktaha, na mumukshu, na muktaha. Um, Ityesha Paramartha Sat or something. This is the highest truth. There is no seeker after liberating and no liberation. Yeah, and Just Seth has given a verse from 1 John 4:18. There is no fear in love, But perfect love drives out fear because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. Exactly. So to love God with desire, to love God without with fear, to love God because we want spiritual progress. Again, all of those are just forms of sanctified shopkeeping. Really, when we love God truly with reckless abandon, it's without desire, without fear. Therefore, it's the kind of love that celebrates everything. Because everything is an example of God's will. So you look around the world and you think, how marvelous. Everything is going on because of her. And so you feel her all-pervasive presence. Which brings me to the closing kind of part of the class, second to last part of the class. Let's talk about the verse. So in the Rauravagama, in the Shiva Jnana Bodha, we hear this. We hear Anya san vyaptito nanyaha karta karmanusarataha karoti samshrutim pumsam agyaya samavetaya. So Lord Shiva is anyas. He is transcendent. He is other than the world. That's important because if God was just the world, meaning if you just had a pantheistic model, that would be great, but not the greatest, because then God would just be changing. Everything in the world is always changing. There is nothing unchanging in the world. So if God was the world, then God would just be changing. There would just be a dynamic aspect. But to use Anselm's and also our definition from earlier, if God is great, then God can't just be dynamic, because arguably a God who is both static and dynamic, a God who is both transcendent and immanent, a God who is both unchanging and changing is clearly better than a God who is just changing, and even better than a God who is just unchanging, because by definition, the more capacious, the more inclusive God is, the more exalted, the more great God is. And if God is the greatest, most inconceivably awesome thing, then she must also be the most inclusive, most capacious. And therefore, the best kind of God will be a God that's both transcendent and immanent. So that's one argument for God's transcendence. God is unchanging, God is beyond the world, God is untouched by the world. Hence, anyas. Anyas means something other than. Now, the great example we get from the Chandogya Upanishad that explains this, the gold and the ornaments, the clay and the pots, the water and the wave. Remember, the gold is transcendent to the ornaments because it exists prior to the ornaments, and it can exist even after the ornaments. The ornaments that are made out of gold depend on the gold for their existence, but gold does not depend on the ornament for its existence. So the gold itself can exist on its own terms without anything, whereas the golden ornaments require the gold. So in this same way, God is transcendent because God doesn't depend on the world, nor is he or she or it affected by the world. So when we chant praises to God, we often say Triguna Rahitam Satchit Brahma Rupam, meaning the pure existence, the pure consciousness, which is untouched, Rahitam, without the three gunas. Or we say Amar Matangi Tara Tumi Triguna Dhara Parat Paramatangi Tara. We're saying you are Triguna Dhara, you hold them. But you're also Paratpara, you're also beyond, supreme. So like each song to God tends to reference, at least above and beyond all other things, God's transcendence. Because that's built into the definition of God. God is not of the world, since the world is always changing and always finite and always unsatisfactory. Therefore, God, because it's unchanging, because it's infinite, and because it's the permanent satisfaction, must be something other than this world. So the word anyas means transcendent. The gold is something other than the ornaments. The clay is something other than the pots. And the water is something other than the wave. But the gold ornament is not something other than the gold. The clay pot is not something other than the clay. And the wave is not something other than the water, you see. So while the water, clay, and gold are something other than their effects or other than their products, the products are not something other than God. So the next line says, Vyaptito Nanyaha. So Anyasan, while being transcendent, Vyaptito Nanyaha. God is also all pervasively present. Now, in Shiva duality, which is what we've been studying together over the past few weeks, the world is seen as distinct from God. Because remember, in Shiva duality, which is really a kind of duality come non-duality, God is transcendent, and the world is like this immanent substance that is actually distinct from God, the way that the maker of the pot and the clay are different. The world is the pot, the clay is the substance out of which the pot was made, but the pot maker is something other than the clay even. So too in Shiva dualism, is God something other than the material substance of the universe. This is actually one of the main differences between Shaiva dualism and Shaiva non-dualism. The idea of God being both the efficient cause and the material cause is only true in Shaiva non-dualism. Whereas in Shaiva dualism, God is just the efficient cause, just the pot maker. He is not the material cause, that is to say, the clay. That's something else. That's called Maya or Bindu or something. I don't think it's Shakti either, because Shakti is actually still part of the efficient cause. Shakti is like the potting wheel or the energy in the muscles of the potter. So the potter, she's God, and the potting wheel is inseparable from her as the power of God. So God and God's power are one. This is called Shakti, and Shakti is included in the category called Pati. The world is called Pasha, and that is not included in Pati. Pasha is something else. It's a substance called Maya or called Bindu. And Pashu is not also included in Pasha or in Pati. These three categories are inalienably real and eternal in Shaiva dualism. There's the Pati, Lord God, which we talked about previously. Pasha, the world, which is distinct from God as a material cause. And Pashu, many Pashus, infinite Pashus, which are all various individuated beings that are distinct from God, but possibly one day one with God. And we're going to explain that in just a few moments. But the first thing we have to say is this. While that might be true, even in Shaiva dualism, God is still all pervasively present in the world. So let's say the world is something other than God, right? But it's not like God creates the world or sculpts the world out of the substance and then steps back. God is not only transcendent, but also immanent. And so the word vyaptito is important. Vyaptito means all pervasive. Anyasan, while remaining distinct. Vyaptito nanyaha, while remaining transcendent, that same God is all pervasively present. Now, the metaphor we sometimes get from the literature is as follows. Picture a lotus. In the morning, first of all, in the night, the lotus is closed. Then, when the sunlight comes, early morning, when the first rays of dawn come, they touch the lotus and cause it to bloom. So without the touch of the sunlight, the lotus doesn't act. Technically, the sunlight is distinct from the lotus, no? By the way, the rays of the sun are not distinct from the sun. When you think of sun, you must think of its rays. The sun rays are inseparable from the sun. The fire's heat and the fire itself are inseparable. Similarly, here, the sun and the sun's rays are one. So think of the sun. Its rays are touching the lotus, which is to say the sun is touching the lotus. And what does that do to the lotus? Although the lotus is distinct from the sunlight has an effect on it by causing it to bloom open. So in a sense, by the will, or I guess you could say by the grace of sunlight, the lotus blooms. Just like that, although this world appears to be distinct from Shiva/Shakti, each thing in this world is being acted upon by the all-pervasive presence of Shiva and Shakti. So Shiva and Shakti, Shiva/Shakti, Shiva-Shakti's presence in the lotus causes it to bloom. Not so much the sun, because the sun is also there because of the presence of God. So in every instance, like right now, the presence of God in this chair allows me to prop up the laptop. And the presence of God as the internet allows me to speak to you. And the presence of God as glucose in the sugar in the tea allows me to, speak. And the vocal cords and your hearing apparatus. And all of these things that are happening by the grace of God. That is to say, her presence is all pervasively felt. And even though in the dualistic sense she is distinct from the world, she still inheres as the power in each thing to cause each thing to have its being. So Sri Ramakrishna had a beautiful teaching. He would say like a beginner devotee, you say beginner, thinks of God as some guy in the sky. He's the inferior bhakta, actually. The word Sri Ramakrishna uses, like inferior devotee, thinks that God is only transcendent. You see. So the transcendence of God is a given. If you only think God is transcendent, you're an inferior devotee. Slightly higher than that is a person who thinks that God is not only transcendent, but present in everyone as the witness. In other words, you feel God's pervasion, but you still feel like God is something else, something other than the world. The highest state, he calls it the Uttama Bhakta, is one who knows that God alone has become everything. So it's not even like God is inside Kristen. God is Kristen. Not God is inside Jyoti or God is inside Kuleshwari. Sometimes we're like that. We're like, the light in me praise the light that is in you. No. To say that is to say that there's a Jyoti and then there's a Jyoti inside there. There's Antar Jyoti inside Jyoti. This is Bahir Jyoti and that is Antar Jyoti. No. Rather, this Jyoti is God through and through. Not that God is in Jyoti. Jyoti is God. That's the fullest, Sri Ramakrishna would say, the fullest bhakti. To see God in all things as all things. So it's like a ladder. Step one is to see God. That's already really hard as the transcendent reality. Step 2 is to see God in all things. And step 3 is to see God as all things. So see God in all things, see God as all things, which is arguably duality, qualified non-duality, and non-duality in a sense, from a bhakta point of view. So from a devotee's point of view, there is God, and this is a theistic monism that we're discussing. So that is non-duality from the point of view of God. So since God is non-dual, even the bones and flesh that make up Jyoti's form, even the thoughts that make up Jyoti are equally divine as that Antar Jyoti, the light that is inside Jyoti. So, and yes, just Seth is right here. It's the power of everything, but it's not the substance itself. Because as you know, the Patti is eternally distinct from the Pasha, meaning the material cause of the universe is something apart from God, the efficient cause of the universe. And part of this actually has to do with the fact that the world is changing, and we don't want that change to taint God's unchanging nature. Ramanuja will say God is like milk and the world is like yogurt, so God like actually transforms into the yogurt. The problem with that, Parinamavada, is that now God has an aspect which is changing, a part. First of all, how can the infinite have parts? But second of all, even if it could, the troubling thing is that you've posited an unchanging God which also changes at the same time. And Ramanuja will just say it's God. God can do whatever he wants. So he can both be changing and unchanging if he wants. But it's not a very satisfying philosophical answer. It's kind of like a mystical religious axiom. But then more troubling is this. Yogurt can't go back to being milk. When milk turns to yogurt, yogurt cannot turn back into milk. So if God becomes the world, then God has been changed. How can God be changed? Change implies time, and God is beyond time. So anyway, with all of those arguments, I think part of why in Shaiva dualism we want God to be something other than the material cause is because the material cause is A, inert, going off of Sankhya and its ideas of Prakriti, and B, because it's changing. If something is inert slash made of compounds and 2 changing, then it's not. So in other words, if something is a compound, if something is inert, and if something is transient, then it's therefore not conscious, or more importantly, it's not God. God is consciousness itself, which is always simple, not a compound, which is conscious, obviously, not inert, and unchanging, not changing. Since the world is a compound and an inert compound at that, and since the world is constantly changing, it's therefore not God. So just to protect God from the problem of insentiency, from the problem of changeability, and also from the problem of compositeness or compoundness, because any compound that comes together had a starting point and has an ending point. So it's another point of change. So that having said that, God must be something other than the world, for the world is nothing but inertness, change, and compounds. So I think that's why the tradition says Anyasan, while being distinct by virtue of pervasion, vyaptito nanyaha, God is not distinct. So then what is the world? Now let's define God with regards to the world. Karta karmanusarataha karoti samshritim pumsam. So God, let's put it this way. Karta, the agent, is the essence of all doers. Karma anu. So karma anu sarataha, the essence of all the individuals who perform actions. So this Lord God, Karta, who is all pervasively present even in the immanence while maintaining his transcendence, this reality is present in the hearts of all beings as the indweller, as the antaryaman, if you will, as the very essence of the doer. And in a sense, he therefore creates the world so that they can do things. They can know and that they can will and that they can do. So the power of God's Icha Shakti leads to, as it were, Jnana and Kriya Shakti being expressed as each individual knower and each individual actor. So when you're knowing something, cognizing something, and when you're acting something, you're doing that through Agyaya Samavetaya, through the Agya command of God. So by God's will, by his command, there is a world, and by his command, the world allows people to do things. And arguably, they do them by his command also. So this is a deterministic reading of a dualistic verse in a dualistic come non-dualistic text called the Rauravagama, an actual Tantra. Anyway, I've given that reading, but there's a slightly less deterministic reading that I think is more popular. And it goes like this. Individuals, the Pashus, the individual souls, are eternal. Each individual soul is eternal. God is also eternal. And the world is also eternal. So there's the eternal God, the eternal world, and the eternal soul. Now, there's something called karma, free will. And the reason eternal souls have free will is because God is free. And a free being, arguably a free being, if it were to create anything, would also create that thing to be free. Because the created has the properties of the creator, just like how yogurt is dairy. Milk is dairy, so yogurt is dairy. The effects always have the essence that is there in the cause. So if God were to create, then its beings would be free. And if eternal souls are conscious, and if God is consciousness, freedom is innate to consciousness. So an eternal soul can't be conscious and bound at the same time, since consciousness by definition is swatantra, free. And again, a lot of this is definitional. So part of how you do philosophy is you come up with a lakshana, a definition, and then you give some evidence for that definition, pramana. So lakshana pramanabhyam vastu siddhihi, which in Sanskrit means to establish a philosophical claim, you first need a definition, and then you need some evidence for that definition. If people reject your definition to begin with, the evidence won't matter. But if they accept your definition and they accept your evidence, then your claim, your vastu, has been established, siddhi. So now what we're saying is the definition of God is the absolute being who is the goodest good, who is the ultimate fulfillment, who is beauty and truth in and of itself. The name God is perhaps superfluous. You can just say Dharmakaya or Buddha nature. You can say instead Jesus or Kali or Krishna. Whatever name you give it doesn't matter. Sri Ramakrishna's foremost disciple Vivekananda said it's the ideal unit abstraction, or unit ideal abstraction or something, which is like you just use a word to define in your own mind this intuitive sense that there is such a thing. Then, if you accept that definition, that God is absolute, then what does that definition imply? And so that's where we get into the philosophy. So it's like you can only start to play the game, you can only start to opt into an idea once you first agree on some initial premises, some initial axioms, which tend to be kind of axiomatic, actually, in that they are just definitions. So here in this tradition, we define consciousness as free, but we can also give some evidence for it. Because notice, consciousness is transcendent to time and space. Therefore, it's not bound by time and space. You are aware of time, so you're not in time. You're aware of space, so you're not in space. And also, those who have experienced samadhi will feel in samadhi the independence of consciousness. Hence, the state is sometimes called kaivalya, a state of abject freedom. Kaivalya means aloneness, but it means all oneness. Just I'm free. And that feeling of freedom, it seems to be inherent to consciousness, just like heat is inherent to fire. So therefore, consciousness is free. And if you're going to say the individual is consciousness, then they are, by virtue of being consciousness, by definition free. So these individuals are free. And so as free beings, they therefore go on to do stuff. And when they do stuff, those actions will have reactions. So the law of karma exists by the will of God. This is really interesting. If God's will is absolute, then karma must be God's will. People often say, oh, it was my karma. But technically, karma has a beginning. Even though karma is argued to be a beginningless series, it kind of has a beginning, not necessarily in time, but in logic. If there is a God, then there must be karma only by God's will. Karma depends on God. So even if karma existed simultaneously with God, by virtue of dependence, karma is still God's will. Because anytime the one who makes the law can break it. Just because you have something coming doesn't mean God can't free you from it. And if God couldn't free you from it, then karma is more powerful than God. Might as well agree with Taylor Swift. Karma is a God. Karma is not a God. Karma is the mechanism through which God enacts her will. God can't be karma. God is greater than karma because karma is mechanistic. It's law and effect. It doesn't take into consideration who you are. It just works the way that throwing an apple up into the sky works, in that gravity will just pull it down to the ground. Impersonally. It's not like you're stupid for falling down the stairs. Just you stepped in the wrong way and gravity impersonally kicked your butt. It's not like gravity is waiting by the stairs saying, this Asha, Every day she just walks up and down the stairs, stomping here, stomping there in her big boots. I'm going to get her. Today I'm going to get her. And then gravity's like waiting and then personally like pushes. No, obviously it doesn't do that. Gravity is an impersonal force. Similarly, karma is also impersonal. It's purely mechanistic. But if it's a machine, if it's a mechanism, then God must be the power behind that mechanism. So many people think, oh, God didn't do it. Karma did it. But karma depends on God. And God, to be God, must be able to override karma. That's why one definition of the avatara is kapala mochana. One who saves you from your doom, your karma. And that's why when you go to Christ and he dunks you under the water, he absolves you of your karmas, meaning you don't have to pay what you owe. But if there wasn't a God, and if there was only karma, then every single thing you do requires compensation. And so in absolute non-duality, there's no karma. And many people have pointed this out. It's like, oh, in your talks, you don't really talk about karma. Why should I? Karma is worldly. I don't talk about karma because I talk about the will of God. In a sense, I don't believe in karma. Why don't I believe? Obviously, there is karma. Like cause and effect obviously exists. But it's not karma. It's just a mechanism through which God enacts her will. It has more to do with God than with me and my actions. But anyway, I'm going to take a more dualistic position now and just argue based on what this verse seems to say, just prima facie. Yeah, exactly, just said, exactly. So, prima facie, it says this: people do stuff, and when they do stuff, they have to get some reactions. And through getting those reactions, they become refined. They get to go on a journey, if you will, and they become more and more mature through experience. So, the purpose of the universe is education through experience. This is a Sankhyan idea. First, in existence, you get bhoga, experience. And through experience, you come to crave apavarga, liberation. So, according to Sankhya, the purpose of Prakriti in Sankhya is to give you both bhoga and apavarga, enjoyment and liberation. And usually in that order. First, you have to like taste everything the world has to offer, life after life after life. You go on and on and on, enjoying the world. And then one day you realize there's nothing really that I'm getting here, yeah, in dharma and artha and kama that is truly fulfilling to me. It's one crazy field trip, isn't it? And then eventually you're interested in the return journey. So you went from space to air to fire to water to earth, and then while you were in earth you had all these experiences, and now you want to go back to pure consciousness. So you have to retrace the steps back up through the chakras. Ma is always desirous of sexual union with Bhairava in the reverse position, meaning the energy which has been flowing this way now wants to flow this way. That's called apavarga. So when you're done with bhoga, then Prakriti gives you apavarga. So Prakriti's job is to give you both experience and also give you freedom eventually. So yeah, Christina's right, like, Ma, come pick me up, I'm scared. Or Swamiji says, open thy gates. Open the door, Ma, I'm coming home. My play is done. Like that. So bhoga is the play, and apavarga is when your play is done. Now each soul is here arguably to play. In other words, they're here to have experiences. And they're here to have experiences so that through those experiences, they may come to want the thing most worth wanting: realization, oneness with God. So as long as a person is not Shiva, he remains a pashu, a bound soul. And as a bound soul, he incurs karmas through his actions made in desire and fear. And the reason the world exists, believe it or not, as this verse says, is to give those souls a chance to work out their karmas. So this accepts free will. It accepts that there is God, it accepts that there is a soul, and it accepts that those souls have some degree of freedom in order to act from desire and fear and thereby incur karmic retribution, for better or for worse. And after innumerable lifetimes of playing out these karmas, eventually they become fit for grace. In other words, their play is done, they've matured. And all their malas, their impurities, if you will, have become accretized and hardened and matured. And then comes a powerful moment when Lord Shiva's grace descends upon that individual. The word Shaktipat is not used in this verse, but it's implied. There's this idea that Lord Shiva, by his own will, produces the world, by his own command, Agyaya, Samvetaya. By his command creates a world, and by his command is the essence of all actors and all knowers. And by his command, karmas occur and rebirths happen in order to pay off those karmas. And one day, by his sweet will, when he feels like it, he inspires a person to spiritual life by appearing as their guru. So arguably when Lord Shiva appears as the guru, that's the grace of Lord Shiva to give a person a sadhana, a spiritual life by which they can work out their liberation. But that person won't get a guru and they won't get a spiritual path until they've come to the place where they're ready for grace. So you could argue the purpose of the universe is to prepare souls for grace. Yeah, time to go home from the playground. But you know what? It's still a playground. So even prior to preparing souls for grace, there's still value in just living your life and having a full experience. Like that's the grace of the Lord, in that she provides a universe in which to play. She gives us a playground, if you will. So in the non-dual sense, Shiva is the one playing. It's not like Shiva creates a playground for us bound souls to play in. Shiva creates a playground and then he alone incarnates as the bound soul in order to enjoy the fullness of his beauty. This is a game that he's playing. So the argument here is that you're not in a prison, you don't need to break out. You're not in a school, you don't need to learn. You're not on a bridge, you don't need to cross. You're in a playhouse, you're in a play, you're in a movie, or you're in a playground, and your goal is to learn how to enjoy being there. And so part of it is like Shiva, his grace is to give this world and to emanate souls in order that they may have experiences. Because experiences are inherently meaningful. What a beautiful idea. Even in Shaiva duality, we get this idea that there's something inherently beautiful. Heck, even in Sankhya, we get this idea. There's something inherently beautiful in simply living your life. That's this like life-affirming attitude we find pervasively in India. This attitude that like life is good and meaningful. And as early as the Vedas, we find an emphasis on dharma, on artha, on kama, on living a meaningful life with much pleasure, but along righteous lines. Like as long as you don't harm other people and we're harmonious to nature and sustainable to nature, like all of that is good. And it's good to be good. It's good to have a good life. And that's fine. So like that's one of the things that Lord Shiva does through Maya, or rather through Prakriti or through Bindu or whatever you want to call it, provides a world. And then embodies himself, if you will, Shiva Eva Grihitva Pashubhavaha, embodies himself as each embodied being and then has fun as them, through them, in order to have bhoga, experiences. So that's one view, that Shiva becomes the embodied soul, Shiva Eva, Lord Shiva alone, Grihitva takes Pashubhava, takes on the body of a Pashu, takes on the role of a Pashu, a bound soul, and then as that soul goes through the universe and does his rounds, if you will, just to enjoy, and then through that becomes a spiritual seeker and graces himself. He comes as the Guru. First he came as the soul in order to enjoy, then he comes as the Guru, so he comes to himself to free himself from himself. And the whole thing is one schizophrenic daydream, if you will. So that's one idea. So Lord Shiva was playing with himself. All of this is just God playing with himself. Sri Ramakrishna would say, Rama, you're torturing yourself, when he saw the boy stab the... It's all just God playing with himself. And then one day, he realizes that he's God and he merges back with his true nature. So that individual soul is done. That individual soul. So like it's like each soul is like a bubble. Some bubbles get to the he's playing with himself. Some bubbles get to the top and effervesce. So it's possible for a bubble to just like stay in the water for a long time, but one day bubble will rise and pop. That's when an individual soul is freed, but the other souls are still there. Okay, so each soul is distinct and real. Shiva is distinct and real, and his grace, or by his command, a world is made in which individuals can reap the rewards of their actions. And so the whole point of the world, according to this dualistic Shaiva view, is like, well, no, it's just there for you to ripen from life after life, to have experiences and to ask yourself, did I really get from that what I wanted? So this idea of like education from experience that we get from Vivekananda. Okay, but now I want to read this verse in a slightly different way. Because it says, Anya san vyaptito nanyaha, karta karmanusarataha. So while remaining transcendent, God is also pervasively present in the world. And as the agent, as the intelligent creator, is also present as the essence of every knower, of every doer. So God's will is the world, and God enjoys the world through knowing and doing, which we all do on our various levels. Even the cat, even the amoeba has this basic property of wanting to know and wanting to do. So jnana and kriya shakti, if you will. Okay, so therefore there is a world by the command of Lord Shiva. But now I want to investigate this idea, karta karmanusarataha, more fully. So if God is the essence of the individual, then God is in that individual at least, if not the individual itself, doing stuff. And so in what sense does the individual's will come to play here? In no sense. Let's look at our own choices. When we choose something, we often feel like we are choosing it. But just because we feel something doesn't mean it's true. In other words, when I look at a mirage in the distance and I think that there's water there, I really feel like there's water there. But that doesn't mean there's water there. When I go, I find that it was just a trick of the light, a shimmering in the distance, nothing more. Similarly, I feel like I chose the Count Chocula on the shelf at the grocery store. But just because I feel like I chose it doesn't mean I did. And that's why Benjamin Lippert studies are kind of interesting. I mentioned them a little earlier. But he like hooked people up to machines. I don't really know the details because I'm not in this world of neuroscience and whatnot. I've only heard of him and heard about his findings. And so they put like nodes or things into people's brains, that read the activity of the brain. And here's what he found. He had people decide whether to click a blue button or a red button, but then he had them write down the decision first before doing it. So the moment they decided, they would write it down and then push the button. So in other words, they would give some cue that they have decided. And having decided, they would then do the act. Okay? So it seems like from where we're sitting, the decision comes first, then the act. But what Benjamin Lippert found in his readings of the brain was that the brain had already made a decision, actually. And so a different part of the brain fires when you choose left, red, or a different part of the brain fires when you choose right and blue, or something like that. They designed the experiment so we can see when the brain neurologically and chemically decides, even before the person is psychologically cognize that she's decided. So he was remarkably able to predict what people were going to decide way before they even knew what they were going to decide. So before a person wrote red, he knew they were going to choose red. Before they chose blue, he knew he was going to choose blue. So he started playing this game where he had almost 100% success rate predicting when people were going to choose red or when they were going to choose blue, even before they knew. Which argues that, physically speaking, your brain, I mean, just from a neuroscientific point of view, according to Benjamin Lippert at least, your brain already chooses for you even before you know it. Isn't that remarkable? So the brain is like, so what do you want to have for dinner? And you're like, I think I'll have the salmon fillet. And the brain is like, I knew that because it chose it. And you now superfluously think I made the choice. But actually, you're just becoming aware of the choice the brain has already made. So that's something Benjamin Lippert has found. And of course, I don't need to get into Sapolsky's book. It's really profound and it's worth reading, I think. But he makes so many arguments on many levels for determinism. And so it seems like, physically speaking even, there's a kind of biological determinism. What to say of a psychological determinism? So when we look at psychological determinism, we're saying, okay, maybe it's not the case that the brain physically and biologically does this, but at least psychology can point to the fact that we're influenced in every moment by everything that's come before it. So there's a kind of psychological determinism. So say I go to the grocery store and I choose Count Chocula. Why did I choose it? I feel like I chose it because I like it and it's because it's my choice. But is it really my choice? Or did I choose it because when I was 3, I saw Nightmare Before Christmas or something, and that made such an impression on me, and then I love that macabre kind of Shaiva Shakta Smashan kind of thing. And then when I saw Count Chocula, I was like, oh, look, a vampire. I love vampires because I love this aesthetic, therefore I want Count Chocula. Was that a free choice? Or was it a choice determined by some event that occurred to me when I was a boy, when I watched the TV or something like that? So every choice that I make feels like I'm choosing, but actually I'm choosing based on all the samskars and vasanas before that. So previous vasanas, previous samskars, meaning previous impressions, have determined the way I'm going to see a situation, which also determines the way I'm going to act in that situation and the choices I make. So even though it feels like I'm making those choices, in a sense they're being made through me. Okay, that's called psychological determinism. But then there's also what is called physical determinism. So it's not just that the biology has a sort of deterministic momentum. It's not just that the mind has a deterministic momentum. The very basic building blocks of matter have a kind of determinism. So things only appear random in the beginning, but once we understand them more and more, we see a pattern, and that pattern is somewhat repeatable and somewhat dependable. Even though you want to say inductive fallacy or whatnot, it still seems like each thing that happens was determined by the thing that happened right before it. So if a particular atom changes a spin or changes a charge, at least from a quantum mechanics point of view, you can trace that change to something that just happened. Or even something that happened in the future in the case of backward causality. But something is always in dialogue with something else. So in the case of interbeing, no thing acts of its own free will. It's always in interbeing with everything else. And so everything else is always at every given point, at least just from a physical point of view, acting on that thing, causing it to do what it's doing. So on all of these 3 levels, biological determinism, physical determinism, and psychological determinism, it doesn't seem like there's that much room for free will, but there is the feeling of free will. So Sri Ramakrishna was an absolute determinist in that his bhava was God alone as the doer. But in another sense, he supported the feeling of free will because he said it just won't do to claim that God alone is doing everything. After all, here's what it will look like. A certain Brahmin had a garden, and it was a very beautiful garden. And one day, he accidentally killed a cow, which is a huge sin in the Indian context. So anyway, he was feeling really bad about it, and he reasoned as follows. But I didn't really do it, though, did I? I mean, after all, each part of my body is governed by an energy. That energy is a deity. So Indra, he is the lord of the hands. That's interesting, guy, that Indra, each god has a particular part of the body that he or she rules over, and Indra rules the hands. So this Brahmin farmer decided that Indra was at fault. He was like, look, I killed the cow with my hands, but since Indra governs the hands, Indra did it. And then you know what happens? Indra is like, what? This guy blaming me for his actions? So Indra wanted to play a prank on him. One day he came to his garden, which is very well tended, he came disguised as a sadhu. And he said, oh, Brahmin, Mahapurush, your garden is so beautiful. Who tended to it? And then he said, oh, I did. It's my garden. I tended to it. And Indra got him. He said, see? When you killed the cow, you said I did it. Because you killed the cow with your hands and I rule the hands. But now, when you did a garden with your own hands, you say it's your hands. But just now you said it's my hands. So which is it? And so Indra catches him on it. So that's how we usually are. We like claim we do it only insofar as it's convenient to absolve ourselves of responsibility. But in other places, we take responsibility because that stuff looks good on us. So it can't be like that. It has to be wholesale and categorical. Either I take full responsibility for everything, or I allow God to be the sole actor of everything. You can't have one without the other. So, with that said, the feeling of free will is important because it creates a sense of conscience, and it's also God's grace to perpetuate the game. Because if I didn't feel like I was freely choosing, I might not be invested enough to make a choice at all. But in truth, I'm not free. God alone is choosing through me. But in my experience, relatively speaking, I feel like I'm choosing, and that's valuable too. So that for the sake of conscience, and for the sake of spiritual journey, the struggle of conscience, all of that is a stage in sadhana. So before Jivan Mukta, we feel like we're free and good. We ought to act as if we are. So that means when it's time to do sadhana, you should accept your free will and your responsibility there. And as a freely choosing agent, you should freely choose sadhana. And you should try your best to make that choice again and again and again. And really feel like it's a choice that you have the power to make. So on that level, you get all the empowerment that comes from the doctrine of free will. This really is your life to live, and you are the captain of the ship, the master of your soul. It's up to you what you will do in this next moment. Intoxicated with that freedom to be able to make your own choices at every given moment, knowing that there is no tyrant or some being acting through you, forcing you to do this or that. That itself is very liberating, isn't it? It's a wonderful thought. And also feeling perfectly safe and knowing that God is behind you, doing everything through you. That is also liberating. Why choose one and not the other? See, some people say, oh, I am free will, I support free will, therefore determinism is wrong. Or I'm a determinist, therefore free will is wrong. That sort of thing doesn't work for the Divine Mother. She's a yes and kind of lady. So she's like, yeah, if you like free will, there is free will. As long as you are not liberated, you feel like the doer, and it's just as well that you do, because that introduces the idea of conscience, it keeps the game interesting, and it gives you a sense of responsibility, but also a sense of empowerment, a sense of inspiration. What you are now is because of karmas in the past, and what you will be tomorrow is because of karmas right now. So I better start working, and I know that I have the power to change my stars. That's a very empowering idea, and that's the way we will feel. But then when we're liberated through making the right empowered choices in life, then we'll realize that it was Mother all along. It was by her grace that we were bewitched. It was by her grace that we came to spiritual life. It was by her grace that we succeeded. At no point did I will anything. Mother alone did everything. That's also bhava. So it depends on which bhava you're in. If you feel like you are the doer, good. But according to Sri Ramakrishna, the moment you stop feeling like you are a doer, then you're liberated. And arguably, if you really didn't feel like the doer, you would be incredibly dynamic. Because you just step out of your own way and God would flow powerfully through you. You would do the best work you've ever done because you're no longer doing it. If you really felt non-doership, you would be a very active being, usually, because then you are a perfect instrument of God and God is ever active, trying to make the world a better place, it seems like. Now, there are some other complicated issues with this. If God is both good and bad, after all, if we do say that God is doing everything, then God is also acting through certain individuals in a harmful way. And Sri Ramakrishna said that there's need of such people too. He gave an example about ruffians, and he was like, if there were no ruffians, then, and he gave a funny story where he was like, a landlord needed some ruffians, some gangsters to help him with a troubling tenant. What would happen if there were no gangsters anymore? How would the landlord be able to enforce the boundary? How would the landlord like press his claim? So the argument is that there's need for those people too. And you give the story of Rama and Sita. Like Sita proposes a utopia. Like, oh, it would be wonderful if like all the houses in the palace in the kingdom in Ayodhya were mansions. And Rama was like, I could do that, but then what would all the stonemasons do? And then everybody laughed. In other words, it would ruin the play. Like if everything was absolutely perfect and nothing hurt. In other words, if there was no blues, no browns, no shade, it wouldn't be good art. So for there to perpetuate the play, God has put in everyone's heart, if you will, a feeling of free will. And importantly, that is just a feeling. In truth, God is doing everything through everyone and including the bad stuff. You know, whether they know it or not, consciously or unconsciously, God alone is acting through them. And you know what else? Everything good that you think you're doing is also bad. That's the beautiful thing about Ma Kali. She has a left and right hand. So every action has both left and right. In other words, both dharma and adharma. Or I started with the left, so adharma and dharma. So that means if you do something you think is helping someone, maybe it's also harming someone. Like maybe by helping them, you've harmed something in the grand scheme of things. You just don't know what it is. And then similarly, by doing some harm in the world, maybe you've done some good in the world. This is where we have to invoke skepticism. We can never account for the actual implication of our actions. Because even when we think we're doing good, we might be doing bad. And in fact, we're actually doing both at the same time. So Swamiji would give this example. He'd say, I'm talking to you now. You might think I'm doing you some good because these words might be helpful to you. But as I'm talking to you, the air is projecting from my mouth and killing all the bacteria that's here in the air in front of me. It's a genocide. Why should my speaking to you be considered a good act when to commit this act I have to use so much electricity, I have to kill so many bugs, I have to kill some tea leaves, like a lot of cost. There's a lot of cost to this. And so no action is wholly good, no action is wholly bad. And therefore, all actions are enacted by the Divine Mother for some gooder good than what the mind can conceive. So a bhakta has this attitude that God is the indweller and the essence of every action and the essence of every cognition, because God inheres in all people as the power to know and to do and to will. So therefore, whatever you have willed, God has willed through you. Even the things that you thought were bad. Like, I can't believe I did drugs, or I can't believe I did that, or I can't believe I did this. God only did that through you. You had no choice but to do what you did, actually. Knowing that, you can be free. You can look back and say, Ma, you alone moved my hand in this way and my mouth in that way, as you have been doing my whole life with all that is good and all that is bad. I give it all to you. I surrendered everything to you because after all, it was yours anyway. And now it's also true. Move me as you would make me move. What do you call it? Yeah. Speak through me the way you would like to be heard. Like, just make me thy servant, thy instrument, thy carriage, thy machine. Like that feeling you can have now itself, and that would be synonymous with liberation. And then we just have to watch and see at what point do we start to feel like we are the doer. And even that's not entirely bad. So all of this to say, in this verse, we get the idea that God is the the one who is both transcendent and immanent, immanent by virtue of pervasion, and the essence of every knower and every doer. So this is only the case though if there's some form of duality. But you see, according to the Shaiva non-dual world, and we'll talk about this next week, a person can become God, even in the dualistic sense. A person is only different from Shiva in ignorance. In knowledge, meaning after purification, the person becomes one with God, synonymous with God. And that's something we'll talk about next week. How can a person become God? But this week, I just want to say this. The problem of evil becomes very pernicious when you take away free will. Because as long as there's free will, you could say, okay, well, God isn't evil. People do stuff. And karma is the best theory, actually, to absolve God of evil. Because even if people have free will, you have to remember that, like, in some traditions, there's no past lives and there are no future lives. So then it becomes very scary. Why is someone born rich and another person born poor? And even if we say later, the poor person will be able to reap rewards in heaven, that still doesn't justify why they had to be poor now. So if God created everyone, you have to respect that God didn't create everybody equally. Some people are crippled, other people are healthy. Some people develop cancer, other people are healthy all their lives. Some people have so many psychological issues. They're chemically imbalanced, they're depressed, they're bipolar. Other people seem to be very perfectly integrated psychologically. All this seems so arbitrary. Why should some people be born chemically like this, another person chemically like that? Why should some people be born physically like this, another person physically like that? How do you account for the fact that so many people are born with silver spoons and other people are born suffering, if not for past lives? Otherwise, it's God. Otherwise, God is the one who created people like this, and there's no justification for God choosing one person over another, being partial in this way. And you can't justify it either by saying later they'll get their reward. No, how do you come to terms with the fact that now itself they are impartially being harmed? The answer to this, in the Indian sense, is no, 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 it's karma. So if a person is crippled, it's karma. It's fierce because you have to take responsibility for everything. It's like everything bad that's ever happened to me, people are always afraid because it's a kind of victim blaming, but it's an empowering thing because it's empowering in that no God inflicted it upon you. If it wasn't you who caused this, then God caused it. God allowed it. Like I often joke in the horror movie, and your God allows it. Your Lord permits it. So instead, what the Indian mind supplies is karma theory. The idea is that there are innumerable past lives. Every action has a consequence, a reaction. And so anything you've done, later you'll have to either enjoy positively or negatively. It's both bhoga though, it's both valuable to you. So if you did a lot of good Vedic sacrifices, you did a lot of charity to holy people, then you should have a lot of pleasure. The merit, the punya generated from those good acts will result in future births that are pleasurable. Whereas if you were a great nuisance, a pain in the butt to everybody, then the papa, the negative merit accumulated. Is it still called merit? No, it's called sin, I guess, or negative action. I don't know what it's called. But I don't like the word sin because it has all those connotations. But this is the negative outcome. It will lead to pain. So it's not saying pleasure is good or pain is bad. Pleasure and pain are just pleasure and pain. And I'm not saying that certain actions are good or certain actions are bad. Just that certain actions are conducive to pleasure and certain actions are conducive to pain. For instance, is a red chili bad? No. If you eat it, it'll be spicy. Is that necessarily bad? No. But the law is if you eat a red chili, it'll be spicy. Similarly, if you do X, you'll get pleasure. And if you do Y, you'll get pain. That's what karma is. And so that is to say, if you're having suffering now in life, either physically or mentally, it's the outcome of some action in the past. And it must have been your action which is leading to this outcome. Otherwise, it's gone. If it's not you, and if it's not past lives, and if it's not a beginningless series of karma, then you have to put it on God. It's God who chose for one person to be crippled and the other to be healthy, one person to be poor and the other person to be rich. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And Kuleshwari is right. Like, and these are all things that can be factored into one's spiritual life also. So it seems like maybe being born into privilege, like we were talking about last week with Abhinavagupta or Vivekananda or Swami Brahmananda, they were all born quite wealthy. Swamiji, of course, fell on really hard times, which necessarily it needed to happen to teach him, arguably, compassion for everyone on all levels of society. And he's kind of lived the whole spectrum, if you will. He's an everyman in a sense. But again, you can't deny that he was born wealthy and he had access to private tutors, the best Sanskrit education. He was raised to be a prince. Had a princely life. So too did Swami Brahmananda. Krishna, Arjuna, they were householders. They were rich. So then Abhinavagupta, he inherited a great fortune from Atrigupta, his ancestor. So then, like, how do you account for that? Because all of that seems to have helped their spirituality, actually, not hindered it. So Kuleshwari is right. It would also affect people's spirituality to be born this way or born that way. So then God's grace is partial. Then God is kind of pernicious for making one person like this and another person like that. Aren't they all equally souls? And if they're all equally souls, why should the lot of one be to be crippled and the lot of others to be healthy? What's the difference? Here we say, don't blame it on God. We say, put it on karma. Like, God created the world. It's we who use that freedom to harm ourselves. This is the basic argument you'll get, not just from karma theory, you'll get it from any form of theism. But I think the problem with most forms of theism is that they don't have past lives. And if they don't have past lives, then they're stuck with the fact that God capriciously chose to make some people crippled and some people healthy, some people poor and some people rich. But we say, no, God didn't do that, karma did that, but it's still free will. You chose freely in some past life to do something, and now you're reaping the result of that. Freely you chose, and freely you must take responsibility for that action. But it's good because that karma is now closed. That loop is closed. You did something and now you got the result done. So every bad thing that happens is good because it's cleansing out bad karmas or karmas that are not helpful or conducive. And the bad things that happen deepen your renunciation anyway. So you can't call them good or bad because what you make of them can be entirely also an expression of your freedom. So say you lost your house. It could be bad. You could say it's bad karma. I did something bad in the past and now something bad has happened to me. I've lost my house. Or you could have done something in the past and then you lost your house and you could think, oh no, it's the best thing that could have possibly happened because now I know that things aren't who I am. Now I know that I can live anywhere else. And now I feel strong and I feel supported and held by my community in a way that I didn't before the fire. So like that, it could be a good thing too. The burning down of the fire could be like an opportunity to build a better house or to live in a better place that you've always wanted to move to. So like that, the burning of the house itself is neither good nor bad. The stories you tell about it can determine how it's experienced, but it itself is neither good or bad, which means the action that was committed in order to cause it was itself neither good or bad. And when you look back, you see that everything was ultimately good because everything ultimately led to your spiritual liberation. So even in a dualistic model where we accept free will, even then you could say each action is teaching you something, deepening you, even the bad stuff and the mistakes that you made. So Swamiji says, bless your mistakes. They are angels unaware. So notice, there's no good act, there's no bad act. There are only acts. And there's no good outcome or bad outcome. There are just outcomes. And the purpose of the world is to create a space for individuals to just work it all out, to do stuff, get the outcome, and learn from it. And maybe do other stuff in the future. Get different outcomes and learn from those. So like that, that's the idea. This is karma theory. Without it, God would be very capricious. So thanks to rebirth, reincarnation, thanks to karma, we now know that the individual is responsible, and therefore the individual has brought onto themselves all that is good and all that is bad, and likewise has the power to determine what the future birth will look like, if even there is to be one. Now, from the non-dual point of view, like we said earlier, there are many reasons to dismiss free will. So how can you say then that a person is responsible for their action when each action was caused by some action before it? And if karma is an infinite series, then at what point does the person become involved? What point does the person become responsible? We argue at no point. God alone is responsible. So we go from willing agents who have freedom, trying to exercise that will and that freedom responsibly, to agents who recognize that they're not agents at all, but merely vehicles through which the Divine Mother has her fun. And then finally, the final realization in this tradition is that you realize you are Mother. So notice this synthesis, antithesis, thesis kind of thing. Thesis 1, you're free. Antithesis, you are nothing but a slave of the Divine Mother, an instrument of the goddess. And synthesis, but you are the goddess. What a beautiful philosophy. It's neither deterministic, nor is it free will only. It's neither compatible. It's not really like, oh, it's a bit of both, a bit of that. No, you can be wholly deterministic, and that's how I feel now talking to you. As long as I feel my body, as long as I feel my mind, as long as I'm aware of myself as niche, I'm ever the devotee. In that, I don't believe I have any freedom whatsoever. Mother, move me as you make me move. I want to speak as you make me speak, like that. And I have to check myself if any time I think I'm doing something. God alone is doing something. And without any fear of consequence, without any desire for outcome, we can live in this life happily. But if one is absorbed in deep meditation, then where is God? Where is the devotee? There only would we dare to say we are free. But actually we're free now because we're always that. Except our experience now is one of the sweet bondage of love, if you will, determined by God every step of the way. So we get both. Outside of samadhi, we are the perfect bhakta. Not even a leaf moves without the will of God. In samadhi, we are the perfect jnani. In that, I am one with Ma, I am absolutely free. And then vijnana, after having that experience, you can feel your freedom actually in the fact that everything in the universe is here because you freely willed it to be. The body and the mind might be acting in a determined way, but you are no longer identified with it. You feel yourself not to be the individual, but the cosmic soul, the Purna Hankta that includes all individuals. And then you will get a heady sense not only of your own fullness, but your own freedom. Chitti Swatantra Vishva Siddhi Hetuhu. The cause of the appearance of the entire universe is the freedom of consciousness, the goddess. Svechaya Swabhito Vishwamun Milayati, using herself as a canvas, moved by her own sweet free will, by her own playful disposition. She blooms the universe into existence as an appearance on the canvas that is herself. You are verily that reality, who is ever free, ever pure, who in freedom has manifested a world, and who in freedom has taken on the role of a bound soul, who in freedom freely submits to the power and will of God, which you recognize to be absolute. So I'm an hard determinist because I'm an absolute theist. And because God is absolute, there is no place for my free will, there is no place for logic, there is no place for anything whatsoever that could encumber God's free will. There's not even any place for me. Because if I was here, God would be limited, and that absolutism would be harmed. So for God to be absolute, God must be absolutely non-dual and absolutely omnipotent, which means omni, all, potent, action. So acting through all beings. So we'll say that verse one more time. God is transcendent, and yet by pervasion immanent. So God becomes the world. Here I'm slipping into the more Advaitic sense of God becomes the world. In other words, the world is nothing but God, materially also. And God, as the world, also becomes all the individual souls, and as the individual souls is the essential knower and doer. And therefore everything that happens by the agyaya, the will of God. Another way of saying that is it happens by the play of God. Let us know this and be free at once. Thank you all so much. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanam Astu. Jai Ma. Jai Ma. Oh my God, when did we start the talk? 10? And now it's 12:30. Was that 2.5 hours? That was 2.5 hours. That's crazy. Didn't feel like it at all. Anyway, Jai Ma, Jai Ma, Jai Ma. What on earth? I thought that was like just an hour or so.